Welcome back to Regaining the Balance. We're reading part 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, line-for-line commentary by Yogananda. And just want to make sure the sound's good. Yep, sounds alright. I thought my mic was getting kind of weird there, but okay, so let's get to this here. There we go. Yes, and before we start, of course, we should probably just give a quick shout out to, let's get to it. There we go. Yogananda.org, the author, Paramahansa Yogananda. Here we go. If you guys are interested, after listening to this book, checking out some of their classes and techniques and various other things, this is where you can find it. I'll definitely at some point put all these links in the description box. Anyhow, let's get to this then, and put this PDF, there we go. Alright, we're good to go. So, Chapter 3, Karma Yoga, the Path of Spiritual Action. Why is activity a necessary part of the path to liberation? Section 2, the nature of right action, performing all works as oblations, yajnas. Righteous duty, performed with non-attachment, is godly. How egoless action frees the yogi from nature's dualities and the bondage of karma. Right attitude towards one's spiritual guide, and sadhana, which is spiritual practice, conquering the two-sided passion, desire, and anger. Let's see here. Chapter 3, Karma Yoga, the Path of Spiritual Action. Why is activity a necessary part of the path to liberation? Verse 1. Arjuna said, O Janardana Krishna, if thou dost consider understanding to be superior to action, why then, O Keshava Krishna, dost thou enjoin on me this awful activity? At the end of the first verse, quote, Your discourse, O divine deliverer, holds that it is better to behold through aloof eyes of wisdom the dramatic events of life as a dream issuing from spirit, rather than be emotionally caught up in the histrionics of this world of delusion. Why then, O Lord, dost thou harness me to dreadful, boisterous activity like a stallion yoked to a chariot of war? Unquote. When Arjuna here addresses Krishna as Janardana, the epithet signifies the ideal guru who shows the devotee the way to eradicate the causes of rebirth and thereby achieve salvation. Keshava signifies the ultimate state of spirit oneness, beyond vibratory conditions of creation, preservation, and dissolution, attained by destroying the demon of evil, delusion, which disunites the soul from spirit. Allegorically, the devotee in his contact with God through intuitive experience addresses the inner divine consciousness as the guiding guru who is pointing the way to liberation, and also as the supreme absolute beyond all modifications of delusion. This stanza depicts the mental conflict of a devotee who occasionally contacts God through fitful intuition and who often wonders why the inner voice, while extolling the primacy of intuitive wisdom, nevertheless insists that the devotee engage in tremendous mind-engrossing activities. Subsection, employing action to attain inaction. Ultimate wisdom is eternal infinite intelligence, the ocean of bliss devoid of nature's changeable waves, passing sorrows or momentary pleasures or any form of actions that belong to the world of temporal vibrations. The unchangeable sea of spirit is superior to its manifesting waves of changeable vibratory creation, as an ocean is superior to its waves because it is the foundation and substance of the waves, and because the ocean can exist without the waves, whereas the waves cannot exist without the ocean. Spirit is the supreme cause, changeless, self-sufficient intelligence. All vibratory activities coming out of the Absolute are conditioned and hence inferior. Similarly, ultimate wisdom is found in man's deepest interior consciousness, his soul. The waves of vibrating activities coming out of that intelligence are found in his exterior body. Hence, though bodily activities are indeed inferior to wisdom, soul wisdom, nevertheless, wisdom cannot be achieved by man without some sort of mental and bodily participation. The vibrationless state of all supreme wisdom cannot be attained by man in the beginning, as he is born to a natural, quote-unquote, body, consciousness. Until the body delusion is conquered, man is totally unable to manifest wisdom. To destroy his false identity with the body, man has to engage in the inferior, quote-unquote, yet necessary, liberating outer activities. Employing action to attain inaction is illustrated in the Hindu scriptures as, quote, using a thorn to remove another thorn, unquote. Just as a man may use a sharp thorn to eject from his finger a painful thorn embedded there. Once the devotee has rid himself of the delusions of body consciousness, he is automatically freed from the necessity for action, karmic duties. He now, quote, throws away both thorns, unquote. That is, neither the body nor its activities have any further value. They have already served the purpose for which they were created, and the yogi is ripe for the manifestation of wisdom, the ultimate state transcending all activities. Another subsection, titled Necessity for Meditation Techniques. The deeper esoteric implications of Arjuna's query in this stanza developed in the following several verses. It is in reference to Sri Krishna's repeated exhortation that the devotee must engage in the wisdom-procuring action of conquering sensual body consciousness by yoga meditation. The coccygeal, sacral, lumbar, dorsal, cervical, and medullary plexuses should become centers of man's consciousness. Should become centers of man's conscious spiritual activities. The devotee, by the process of proper breathing methods and various deep meditative activities, as in Kriya Yoga, should constantly centralize his consciousness in the spinal centers. Thus he becomes eligible to remain in the vibrationless, non-active state within the cerebral thousand-rayed lotus light of spirit. Some devotees temporarily attain the vision of the centralized light of spirit in the brain, give up their definite yoga exercises, considering them to be inferior meditation. This is a mistake. All spiritual activities, special meditations and proper pranayama techniques, Kriya Yoga, must be continuously followed in order to have not only the vision of the thousand-rayed light of spirit in the brain, but to be permanently anchored there. Meditative activities are inferior to wisdom after it is attained, but they inexorably precede that final realization. Verse 2, Arjuna continues, with these apparently conflicting speeches thou art, as it were, confusing my intelligence. Please let me know for certain that one thing by which I achieve the highest good, by which I will achieve the highest good, quote, your counsel though eloquent and assuredly wise is yet seemingly contradictory. My grasping power is bewildered by your subtle conflicting words. Can you not simply point out to me that one portal which leads directly into the palace of perfection, unquote? This typifies the psychological state of the devotee whose understanding is not yet finely tuned to intuition. He is often confused by apparently contradictory advice from the scriptures or his guru. For example, when a master once told his disciple, quote, you must eat and you mustn't eat, the disciple replied, quote, Master, I do not understand. Your commands are contradictory, unquote. The master replied, quote, true, you do not understand. My advice is perfectly harmonious. What I mean is that you must eat when you are truly hungry, only to give proper nutrition to your body for maintaining the temple of your soul. But you must not eat when you are tempted by the deep-seated wicked appetite of greed, under the guidance of which you will overeat and destroy your health, unquote. Similarly, whenever Krishna advises, in essence, quote, live in this world but do not live in it, unquote, he meant that man should live and fulfill his duties in this world since God put him here, but he should not live in attachment to its wiles and ways. Spiritual advice is often paradoxical. Far from being contradictory, it rather reflects the inadequacy of corporeal expression to convey that which is above the familiar, quote, this or that, unquote, duality of nature. Among Christian saints, how given to paradoxes is St. John of the Cross in his mystical poesy, quote, the music without sound, unquote, and, quote, with fire that can consume and yet do no harm, unquote, and, quote, eternal life you render and change my death to life even while killing, unquote. Jesus said, quote, for whoever will save his life shall lose it, but whoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall have it, unquote. God is the great paradox, the soul life, the only being yet invisible, intangible, the formless and every form. In spiritual life, worldly standards are reversed, quote, sell all thou hast and give to the poor, unquote, or, quote, take ye no thought for the morrow, unquote. These are uncompromising reversals of, quote, common sense, unquote, are dismissed by the average man as bewildering or paradoxical. Arjuna is thus confused at the advice of his guru Krishna, who extols wisdom as superior to action and at the same time advises him to act. Verse 3, quote, "The cosmic Lord said, 'O sinless one, at the onset of creation, a twofold way of salvation was given by me to this world, for the wise, divine union through wisdom. For the yogis, divine union through active meditation.'" Unquote. And here is the sort of longer translation of that. Quote, "When I set man out in creation, I gave him two paths by which he could retrace his steps to me: discrimination, Sankhya or Jnana yoga, and right action, karma yoga, the highest activity of which is the scientific meditation of the yogis. Both take men on the right course towards salvation, but when the devotee is nearing ultimate freedom, then wisdom and meditative action merge into one inner highway to self-realization, the culmination of which is union with soul and spirit, or union of the soul with spirit, Commonly interpreted, Jnana yoga is the way of knowledge and discrimination, Sankhya; karma yoga, the way of right action, spiritual and meditative. The way of discrimination is for the rare, keen-eyed, wise man. For all others, the path of activity and meditation combined. A subsection titled Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga are two stages of one path. In this stanza, however, Krishna refers specifically in both cases to divine union, yoga, the liberation of the soul in spirit. In this higher context, the paths of discrimination and spiritual action are really one, quote, twofold, unquote, highway of self-realization, wisdom, produced by following a definite technique of active meditation. Meditative activity, and not just ordinary activity, is implicit in Krishna's reference to karma yoga as the path for the yogis. Ultimate knowledge of God is the goal of human freedom, but this final all-satisfying lore cannot be attained without first having practiced the methods of meditation. As an apple blossom and the apple are inseparably linked, so are meditation and wisdom. No blossom, no apple; no meditation, no wisdom. Wisdom is the house, meditation is the foundation. The Gita emphasizes both wisdom and meditation because many devotees falsely imagine that a theoretical knowledge of scriptures without meditation will lead to ultimate freedom. But mere theoretical study of scriptures is detrimental to real attainment of wisdom if it produces egotism and the false conviction that one knows when one does not know. Scriptural knowledge is gainful only when it produces the desire to demonstrate in one's own life the validity of the spiritual precepts. Absolutely, 100%. And that's why, I've said this in many other videos. Is if your spiritual path isn't working for you, then maybe it's not. You have to judge things by its fruits, and that's the thing. Like a lot of, let's just say institutionalized religions are losing, lots of different people just because it's not doing it for people. You know what I mean? They're not really teaching. They're just spouting out scriptures and being like, "Yep, this is what it says, and you're gonna go to hell," or X, Y, and Z. I mean, I don't know. It's a strange way of. It's almost like people are losing, a way of being able to communicate these kinds of ideas, and it's just odd. So I think it's an important point. Anyways, continuing. Thus, after all, there is only one way to God wisdom. Even the Jnana yogi who achieves God union through the sole path of Vedanta, or constant mental discrimination, God alone is real, all else is unreal, unquote, has been in past lives a yogi or successful follower of a meditation technique of interiorization for God communion. That's interesting. So this line, God alone is real and all else is unreal, is actually one of the very first lines of the. It's extremely similar to one of the very first lines of that book, A Course in Miracles, which is very similar to this, but with a Christian kind of swing into it. It's fascinating. Maybe one day I'll get into that one too, because the comparisons are pretty crazy here. Anyways, continuing, such an advance, and I just also want to point out that, the God union through the soul path of Vedanta, again, he's from the Vedanta Swami school of Shankara, so there are other schools. The Saiva schools are different. They're similar, but they have kind of different ways of looking at things, so just want to point that out. Continuing, such an advanced being has been born in his present life with an already established wisdom acquired from past meditative efforts. He is one of the, quote, wise, unquote, referred to in this Gita verse, one who is already far along the path of wisdom or God realization. With the stimulus of divine ardor and wisdom thoughts, he rouses the wisdom samskaras, karmic propensities, already within him, and attains God union without further application of a formal technique of meditation. For the final union, his consciousness, as that of all ascending beings, follow the inner meditative route of ascension through the cerebral spinal yogic centers to spirit. And I just want to say also is that at least online, there's all this talk about the ascension events and ascension this and whatever else, and I always thought, I pay attention kind of to it, but after like a side glance or whatever, but I think with a lot of things, people get these kinds of things confused because, the ascension, it's a thing, but like it's a personal thing. You're not just going to be walking around one day and be like, bam, ascended, you know what I mean? Like, it's obviously something that takes time and spiritual effort, and obviously this book is talking about exactly that. So just want to point that out because I see a lot of that stuff online. Anyways, continuing. Even the yogi, however, does not attain perfection if he meditates without concentrating on the final goal of wisdom. Like a man who has become so fond of walking on a path that he saunters aimlessly without reaching a predetermined destination. Many devotees who love meditation and the joy of it, or they become enamored with seeking powers of phenomena, forgetting that meditation is only a means to an end. The goal is God. Because God wisdom is unattainable except by following the path of deep meditation, the Gita here speaks of wisdom and meditation as the two ways of the twofold way to the infinite. In this stanza, nothing is mentioned of devotion or of spiritual activities for redeeming others, or the discriminative study of scriptures, or prayer. They are all byways, that is, insufficient in themselves. Interesting. So this subsection is titled Meditation is the Ultimate Liberating Action. Continuing, God wisdom is not attained by such religious activities as trying to save others' souls without having first achieved one's own salvation. Good point. Nor does man find God through ordinary distracted prayers or chants or spiritual singing or superficial devotion during which the mind runs in sundry directions. Spiritual activities are necessary bypaths that one should follow in order to reach the highway of meditation. After one has finished traveling over the highway of meditation, he attains the all-coveted God wisdom. No devotee of any religion should be satisfied with untested beliefs and dogmas, but should engage himself in practical efforts to attain God realization. Union with spirit is possible only when the devotee, casting aside the superficial method of ceremonial worship or the ineffective, quote, going into the silence, unquote, begins to practice a scientific technique of God realization. One cannot reach this goal just by mental meditation. Only deep concentration that disconnects the mind from breath, life force, and senses, and that unites the ego to the soul is successful in producing the God wisdom of self-realization. All of the methods are preliminary or supportive bypaths. Withdrawing mind and life force from the sensory and motor nerves, the yogi leads them through the spine into the brain, into eternal light, where the mind and life become united and the eternal wisdom of spirit manifested in the cerebrum. The center of consciousness for the average individual is his body and the outer world. The yogi changes his center of consciousness by non-attachment to the body and to the worldly hopes and fears by a technique such as Kriya Yoga, of consciously controlling the life processes that tie the consciousness to the body, stilling the heart and breath. The yogi becomes established in the eternal wisdom perception of spirit that manifests in the spiritual center of cosmic consciousness in the brain. The yogi who can change his center of consciousness from the sentient body to the cerebral throne of spirit ultimately centralizes his consciousness on omnipresence. He attains the eternal wisdom. Verse 4. Actionless is not attained simply by avoiding actions. By forsaking work, no one reaches perfection. That's the end of verse 4. None reach divine actionlessness without having worked for the pension of that blissful state. By rash renunciation of responsibilities, one finds no true felicity. The unmanifested Absolute, by projecting a portion of his consciousness as a cosmic creative force, descended from his non-active or vibrationless state into the active or vibratory states that uphold the universe. From the vibrationless region, through a cosmic rhythm of ordered activity, the spirit thus brought into being all vibratory creation. Man is a part of that vibratory cosmic activity as an integral entity in the cosmic plan that all creation, projected out of spirit, must evolve back into spirit. man also must ascend through activity in harmony with the divine schema. All activity is intelligent vibration. Evil actions are wrong, disordered vibrations, repulsive forces that take man away from spirit and involve him by his indulgence in them with the gross world of matter. Good actions are attractive vibrations that direct the devotee toward the spirit. Through the vibratory state of proper activity of the world in which he has been born, man ascends into the high vibrationless state of the transcendent spirit. By ordered activities of body and mind and self-discipline, the devotee withdraws from different vibratory spheres, from gross matter to the finer realms of consciousness, into the region of vibrationless spirit that is beyond the activity of all creation. Worklessness in the mystical sense is the goal of life. It can be attained not through idleness, nor through material or evil activities, nor, as commonly assumed, by merely leading a normally, quote, good life, but only through intense liberating activities. A subsection titled The Real Workless State Not Attained by Forsaking Action. A lazy man cannot be one with spirit. If he does not go forward, he is bound to drift backwards. Many seekers erroneously think that to forsake all worldly activities and to remain in idle seclusion is the way to the highest or inactive state of spirit. But the ordinary man, whose mind is identified with the senses and bodily environments and who equates himself with breath and body, is imprisoned in a material world. Even if he tries to, quote, leave the world, unquote, and lives in the seclusion of a jungle, he will find that without proper meditation his mind will still be attached to his senses. Simple renunciation alone is not a net ample enough to capture the omnipresent spirit. The renunciant should not be satisfied with living idly as a recluse. He should learn to practice breathlessness and heart control by which he can switch off the life force from the 5 sense telephones of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. By such intense spiritual activity, devoid of laziness, the devotee learns to disengage his mind from the invasion of thought-creating sensations. When the mind is disconnected from the senses in deep sleep, it is free from the disturbances of sensations and thoughts. In deep meditation, the mind is consciously liberated from all sensations and their train of multifarious disruptive cognitions. As in the mind in deep dreamless sleep reaches a passive inactive state, so in deep meditation the mind reaches a conscious inactive state. But as idleness produces insomnia or lack of that refreshing sleep which is readily bestowed after hard physical or mental work, so spiritual inertia gives no beneficial results that are readily available if one is engaged in proper activities. The real workless state is therefore attained by the intense good activities of meditation and service, never by forsaking action and becoming paralyzed with idleness. And I said something yesterday with the last reading, where I kind of talk about. I mentioned that my gardening job, and the thing is that when people talk about service or when Christians talk about good works, so to speak, one of the interesting things is that people just think about, I do good things for this person and that person, whatever. But if one really gets into this spiritual mindset, then all actions, all conscious actions that you do are essentially yajnas or sacrifices or oblations, let's just say, to that divine spirit, which is everywhere in all places. So you're literally just, in recognition of that sort of, your service to your everyday life and what you do is a big deal. And they're going to go into that a little bit more in this further in this chapter. So that'll be an interesting one. Anyways, continuing. In India, many renunciants, while this subsection is titled The Rightly Guided Devotee, is intensely active in a divine way. In India, many renunciants who leave the world doing no work socially or meditatively and living on charity become lazy and worthless, never attaining God consciousness. But those who sincerely perform good actions and who are active inwardly in meditation receive the spiritual pension of remaining forever in the free inactive state of the spirit. The right guided devotee is intensely active in a divine way, disengaging his mind from restlessness and desires. By following moral principles, bodily disciplines, practice of life force control, meditation, spiritual service by interesting others in the divine path, interiorization of the mind, and samadhi, ecstasy, the true student lifts himself from the eddies and whirlpools of wrong activities and rides the crest of the rhythmic waves of good activities towards the vibrationless inactive state of spirit. By ordered activities, the devotee gradually arrives at the inactive state of divine union, the highest or pranamahamsa state. Even as God the Father is free from all vibratory creation, so any of his sons who return home becomes free. He is under no karmic compulsion to work. A master is one who, by intense humanitarian and spiritual meditative activities, has attained God union. Free from all worldly desires, he can be active or inactive, ever one with the vibrationless spirit beyond all creation. No mortal or conscription of nature has control over a master. He is a pensioner only to God. These aspiring devotees should heed the warning of the Bhagavad Gita. Though wisdom is superior to activity, all ultimate knowledge cannot be attained without activity. Social, moral, religious, and meditative actions are all spiritual activities. They are different rungs on a ladder of salvation that every devotee must first climb in order to reach the illimitable sky of wisdom. When one has attained the finality, then he is not bound to any activity, though he may continue at will to perform actions. To set a good example to their followers, fully emancipated masters such as Jesus, Babaji, Lahiri Maya Saya, and my own guru, Sri Yukswar, engage themselves in various spiritual activities. The meaning in this stanza of the Gita can be illustrated in the following way. A businessman by intense activity becomes rich and then takes his life easy. He is one of the, quote, deserving, unquote, idle. But if a poor man is ambitionless and lazy and remains inactive, he is one of the, quote, undeserving, unquote, idle. His lot is misery. When a man makes idleness his goal, it is very harmful to him. The rich idler is far better man, other things being equal, than the poor idler. Similarly, the workless man who is a master Similarly, the workless man who is a master has attained his state after earning a pension in the office of good activities, but the idle spiritual beginner has no right to a workless state. The ordinary idle man is body-bound. The motionless meditative man, though apparently idle, is free from the body, working and resting in the omnipresent spirit. The idle man is a slave to the body, afraid to work, while the calm meditative man is a master of the body, never hesitating to engage in intense activity. It's interesting, too. It's funny, like many jobs I've had in the last 10 years, I have had a lot of bosses, be impressed with my work ethic. And I'm always surprised by that, because I'm just like, I'm here to do a job and I'm just doing the job. Like, I'm maybe good at doing the job, but like, it always surprises me. But on top of that, like sort of what they're talking about here as far as being part of the world and not being part of it is, and that workless state is this, once you've kind of freed yourself from all these kind of attachments to the fruits of your labor, so to speak, work then is just the thing that you do, It's not something that becomes a burden necessarily. And I can definitely attest to that. I don't mind working at all on all kinds of different stuff. But the stuff that I like best is the stuff that like is more creative, I'd say. Kind of why I'm doing gardening these days. But continuing, the ordinary idle man is... Ooh, did I already do that? Yes, I think I did. Yes. Okay, so this section is subtitled Attainment of Wisdom Brings Everlasting Pension of Peace. A devotee must continue to travel on the path of spirituality until he reaches his goal. One day, lo, he is there. He will not have to continue his walk in order to get there again. The flower comes before the fruit. When the fruit is ready to appear, the flower falls off. The flower has been indispensable for the production of the fruit, but the fruit is a tree's highest achievement. The flower of liberating action is necessary to attain the fruit of wisdom. When wisdom is achieved by its complete and whole making action unnecessary, it is not all work and effort throughout eternity. When God's wisdom is attained, the devotee has earned the everlasting pension of peace. In Autobiography of a Yogi, in which he is also the author, and that's a story about his life, definitely suggest reading that, I quoted the Persian mystic Abu Said with the following commentary, quote, "To buy and sell, yet never to forget God," unquote. The ideal is that hand and heart work harmoniously together. Certain Western writers claim that the Hindu goal is one of timid escape, of inactivity and antisocial withdrawal. The fourfold Vedic plan for a man's life, however, is a well-balanced one for the masses, allotting half the span to study and and householder duties, the second half to contemplation and meditational practices. Quote, solitude, time for meditation and thoughts of God, is necessary to become established in the self, but masters then return to the world to serve it. Even saints who engage in no outward work bestow, through their thoughts and holy vibrations, more precious benefits to the world than can be given by the most strenuous humanitarian activities of unenlightened men. The great ones, each in his own way, and often against bitter opposition, strive selflessly to inspire and uplift their fellows. The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, 4-8, points out that activity is inherent in man's very nature. Sloth is simply wrong activity. Oh, that's a great point. Verse 5, verily, quote, verily, no one can stay for even a moment without working. All are indeed compelled to perform actions willy-nilly, prodded by the qualities, gunas, born of nature, prakriti. Not being under the sway of, unquote, that's the end of the verse, not being under the sway of nature can remain action-free even for a trice, for all perforce must abide by the laws that govern a universe whose every part owes its existence and character to the constant flux and silent influence of the three inherent gunas, or qualities. The gunas of nature, her qualities or modes of expression, are sattva, positive or elevating, rajas, neutral or activating, and tamas, negative, obstructing. Sattva produces Godward leading qualities, rajas, materially progressive qualities, and tamas, evil and ignorance producing qualities. The entire cosmos is created and guided by the actions and interactions of these three gunas on the 24 attributes of nature. The human body, a product of cosmic nature, is inexorably ruled by the three motion producing qualities. Man cannot stand still. He will be compelled to perform actions of good, bad, or mixed qualities. Tamasic or evil activities make one abnormal and unhappy. Rajasic or energizing activities make one normal and able in disciplining the body and mind. And sattvic or good activities awaken God consciousness and guide man to the region of spirit. The soul is beyond the creative vibratory attributes of nature, but when it becomes identified with the mind, life force, and body, it puts on their restless active nature. As ego, it cannot remain without some sort of organized mental, vital, and bodily actions. This stanza elucidates the preceding verse that the worklessness cannot be achieved without having followed some kind of interiorizing activity. No beginner in the spiritual path must dream of resting on the roof of worklessness without having first made the active effort of climbing the stairway. That's a good point. He who is still a stranger to his soul, which is beyond all active states, must choose to move inward by good activities, or he will be forced by nature to move outwards by material activities, or by God eclipsing evil actions. Every man is thrown, as it were, into a boisterous river of the activities of nature. If he does not swim, if he tries to remain neutral, he will disappear from a world whose keynote is struggle. The universal flux does not accommodate a stationary man. He who does not move forward with wisdom and determination will surely drift backwards, just another bit of flotsam caught in the current of delusion. But if he ceaselessly swims, he will reach land, safe from the raging river. Idleness, or so-called non-activity, acts like a petrifying agent on the mental and bodily processes, preventing one from making a free will choice to go either backward or forward. But the Gita says that even the idle person cannot remain wholly without activity. His undisciplined mind will be active in delusion, even as his body is inactive in sloth. His organic processes of life will be working, moving by the laws of nature. He may lay down and forsake all bodily movements. Even so, without the technique of yoga, he is unable to stop his heart action, breath, circulation, and the activities of his internal organs, not to mention the activities of his thoughts and memory. For him, non-activity is impossible. The hard-working, honest, worldly man devoted to duty is extolled in the Gita as better than the self-deceiving recluse who leads an idle, non-meditative existence. The man who meditates, however, be he householder or renunciant, is actively moving Godward and is better than the worldly man who moves very slowly towards perfection through the purifying influence of good activities only. Let's see here. Subsection titled Wisdom Guided Activity, Meditation, Introspection, Right Behavior, and Moral Discipline. Activity of mind and body guided by the soul's discrimination or by the guidance of a guru is called wisdom-guided or sattvic activity. It consists in controlling of the senses, meditation, introspection, right behavior, moral discipline, and spiritual culture. This wisdom-guided activity should be substituted for wrong activities in which the senses govern the mind by a lure of temporary pleasure. Wisdom-guided activity leads to eternal ever-new bliss and should therefore govern the devotee's entire life. When the yogi advances and can disengage his soul from the body by controlling the heart and by switching off the life current and the pulsation of the life force in mind and the body, he has reached the refuge of the eternal non-active calmness. The yogi who rests on the self becomes established in the vibrationless calm joy of the infinite. After uniting with the spirit that dwells beyond all vibrations, then alone can one be free from the compulsory influence of all active vibrations of the cosmos. The idle, slothful man is helpless. His soul is ruled by body and mind. The ordinary man cannot help being active, voluntarily or involuntarily, but he is restlessly active and actively restless. The calm yogi can whirl his body and mind into intense action without being identified with them, and can then instantly return to his inner action-free state of meditative communion with spirit. He is ever calmly active and actively calm. That's absolutely true. Verse 6, the quote, the individual who forcibly controls the organs of action but whose mind rotates around thoughts of sense objects is said to be a hypocrite, deluding himself, unquote. He who subdues his senses outwardly and not inwardly, as might a recluse who renounces worldly pleasures but continuously broods over objects of his deprivation, is self-deluded and living a lie. A false sense of assurance and self-sufficiency will allow temptation to catch him off guard. At whatever level of activity one begins his spiritual ascent, dutiful or serviceful actions, altruism, religious worship, meditation, and spiritualizing of that activity must begin in the mind and not in outward behavior only. Many people refrain from certain acts, not from thoughts about them. A man may inwardly covet the beautiful wife of another, but restrain himself from getting involved for fear of trouble. His inner inclination, reinforced by constant brooding, however, is likely to lead him to succumb to temptation. Destroy evil in thought as well as in deed. Persons who do not harmonize their thoughts with their actions cannot trust themselves. Their inner temptations daily become stronger by being fed with continuous supportive thoughts. These thoughts of temptation are the real cause of trouble. If the inner temptation increases to flood-like proportions, the little embankment of outward self-control is swept away. It is thus unsafe to forsake outwardly an evil action and inwardly to keep on nurturing it. When the evil thought becomes strong enough, it will destroy all the obstructions of outward self-control. Of course, it is better to exercise even an outward control than loosely to succumb to temptations. A man who flouts moral laws just because he feels tempted is evil and disgraces himself and others. Even a hypocrite, if he has enough mental power to control his sensual activities, although he cannot restrain himself from lustful thoughts, is a better and stronger man than the boasting libertine. On the long run, however, it is inadequate to control the organs of action from outward evil without also controlling the mind, the real instigator of all actions. Those who remain in a castle with all gates closed against intruders cannot long be safe if enemies are hidden within this castle itself. That's funny. I made this similar analogy last stream. Okay, so subtitle of this section is Control of Actions Begins with Control of the Mind. If one wants to conquer a temptation and to be free from the physical, social, mental, and spiritual troubles that it brings, he must exterminate within himself the seed of evil that may otherwise grow into a huge tree, bearing the fruits of misery. Like a cancer, the inside roots of evil must be taken out, lest they suddenly spread and destroy the spiritual life. Over sexuality, greed for food or money, the, quote, many foolish and hurtful lusts which drown men in destruction and perdition, unquote, in the end unfailingly bring unhappiness after having overcome the tempted one with the chloroform of a temporary joy. The delusive pleasure coating of evil eclipses the right judgment of people, making them choose pleasure-coated poisonous evil and forsake good. Good is the sweet pill of lasting happiness, coated over with a momentarily bitter difficulty of discipline. Each person must judge for himself and make the wiser choice. In overcoming a temptation or bad habit, man should first seek to convince his mind, giving the reasons for abandoning the evil, Then he should reject the thoughts of temptation as they appear, as well as relinquish the habitual actions. Repetition of evil acts produces and reinforces evil thoughts. Evil thoughts lead to and reinforce evil actions. Both must be restrained. Hypocrisy is an assumed physical pose or conduct that does not sincerely represent the corresponding mental state. The Gita warns one against such mental inconsistencies as hypocrisy, but it does not say that because of the lack of inner self-control, outer restraint should be given up. Outer self-control should ideally be preceded and accompanied by inner discipline. Nevertheless, a merely outward self-control is better than no control at all. To renounce worldly pleasures without forsaking them inwardly, just to impress others or to escape into a less taxing reclusive sanctuary, that is hypocritical. To renounce the world to seek God in a positive way, even though there is still a struggle with inner desires, that is not hypocrisy, but spiritual heroism. To sit like a calm yogi in lotus posture, inwardly engaging in earthly thoughts like a worldly man, is hypocrisy if the intent is to win the praise and adulation of others rather than to secure the bliss of God. But it is not hypocrisy to practice scientific meditation sincerely in the self-controlled, quiet bodily posture, even if the mind is restless. When the goal is God, eventually this highest form of action will harmonize the restless mental state with a calm physical pose. When the mind and body are both quieted by yoga, the devotee quickly advances toward the joyous state of spirit. Yes, indeed. Meditation's so important. Continuing, verse 7, quote, "But that man succeeds supremely, O Arjuna, who disciplining the senses by the mind, unattached, keeps his organs of activity steadfast in the path of God-uniting actions." Unquote. Of verse 7. "He who, with non-attachment to sensory pleasures, governs the stallions of his senses by holding tight the reins of the mind, keeps them on the wisdom-directed karma yoga, prescribed path of proper action. A royal expert, he rides the bodily chariot to the supreme goal. A man of worldly responsibilities, who keeps his senses under mental control, who works only for God and thus remains unattached to his own desires or ambitions, ultimately by right action will reach the divine goal. The ordinary worldly man erroneously thinks he is in the world to chalk out his own selfish career. The spiritual man engaged in material duties realizes he is in the world not to satisfy his own desires and sense appetites, but to fulfill a divine mission, that of attaining God realization and liberation in him by performing those serviceful actions most pleasing to God. The moral man who governs his senses by his mind and remains unattached to the body, looking after it only as a divinely given charge, and who, with such controlled senses and wisdom, directs his organs of activity, brain, hands, mouth, feet, sex, speech, to the path of right action in everything, specializes in activity that leads to the spiritual goal, to the supreme goal of life, the attainment of God and his ever-new joy. The spiritual devotee masters the activities of the senses by controlling the mind in meditation and turning it Godward, constraining the senses to follow. He is unattached to the fruits of his meditation. He meditates not solely for the enjoyment of supreme bliss, but to please God by returning home from the tour of incarnation to be reunited with the Divine One after whose image he is made. His motive is therefore not selfish joy, but a desire not to desecrate that perfect image. The spiritual man so loves God that he becomes spiritual only to please him. The true devotee finds his happiness only in what is pleasing to God. The words of Karma Yoga, the paths of works or inactivity, have been used in this stanza the paths of works or activity have been used in this stanza to signify those proper activities, karma, that unite the soul with spirit, yoga. When the good worldly man, or the moral man, or the meditative spiritual man keeps his senses under control and harnesses his wisdom-guided desires to the organs of action, he moves in the proper path of activity. All God-leading activity is karma yoga. The worldly way of good action provides a lengthy path to God. A life of moral discipline is a quicker way to God. The meditative life is the fastest way to God. Meditation may seem to be a withdrawal from activity because it demands from the beginner an absence of bodily movement, but deep meditation is intense mental activity, the highest form of action. Through the divine science of Kriya Yoga, the advanced yogi is able to withdraw his mind from the physical senses and direct their subtle astral powers to their inner activities of soul-freeing work. Such a spiritual specialist performs true God-uniting activity, karma yoga. This is the highest path of karma or action. It leads directly to God as differentiated from outer activities of religion, such as ceremonies and missionary work in which the mind is on precepts rather than absorbed in the actual inner experience of God. Many preach the kingdom of God. Yogis find it within. I like that verse. And as we know, Jesus did say, the kingdom of God is within you. So let's see here. Verse 8. Let me just take a quick drink. Okay, verse 8, quote, "Perform thou those actions that are obligatory, for action is better than inactivity. Even simple maintenance of thy body would be impossible through inaction," unquote. Of verse 8. No accomplishment is possible in a state of inertia. Complete inactivity precludes even bare bodily existence. Having understood that dynamic activity is superior to devitalizing idleness, one should embrace those requisite duties to which one is bound by the laws of nature, and those divine duties that foster soul culture. Activities of life none can completely forsake and live. Even the idle man has to maintain his body. However, it is not merely action itself that is purifying and uplifting, but dutiful actions. These attract the devotee to the path of spirit. Evil actions, on the contrary, repulse the soul's vibrations. Inaction is inhibitory, stultifying. When idleness hypnotizes the ego into inactivity, it may bring no apparent trouble, whereas evil actions may swiftly result in dire miseries. Yet it takes a long time for lazy people to get back to God, pushing along by the slow evolutionary process operable in even apparently inert matter. Whereas an enterprising, somewhat unscrupulous businessman, for example, might, after abandoning evil, progress swiftly in his search for God simply because he has already cultivated progressive activity, resourcefulness, and initiative. The habitually idle man and the unscrupulous businessman, however, have one obstacle in common. Both find it very difficult to change their respective habits and so remain enslaved. As wrong business exploitation is a social crime, idleness is a spiritual crime that debases the human being. Hence the Gita adjures man to be spiritually active and keep moving onward through dutiful actions rather than remain a prisoner of the flesh through indolence. In his absolute nature of spirit, God transcends all the activity of creation. Yet he works in every atomic cell of his vast body of the physical cosmos. God expects man created in his image to perform similarly the duties connected with his daily life and the maintenance of the body, and at the same time to remain aloof, inwardly enthroned in his soul perception. Mind in conjunction with the senses has to work. Mind drawn into God becomes inactive and transcendental like the spirit. Anyone who can gradually transmute the work of the life current in the body by switching off the life force from the nerve telephones and disconnecting the mind from the senses attains the true inactive state of the spirit. When the yogi by his mind or by his method has reached savikalpa samadhi, he can keep his body indefinitely entranced in God. He wishes to do so, remaining above all activities. Yes. All right. In the highest state, nirvikalpa samadhi, the yogi is consciously united with God without the necessity of suspending the activities of the body. Being one with the spirit, or being one with the supreme, and having no personal desires, he performs all of his actions only to please God. Hence, they are termed inactive actions, nishkama karma, desire-free actions that produce no binding effects. When one acts only to please God, he has achieved the real or spiritual inactive state that is free from both obligatory duties and from karmic bondage resulting from actions. The highest dutiful activity, therefore, consists in practicing those methods of meditation through which the devotee is ultimately freed from worldly karmas. Subsection is titled Admonition to Monastics Who Leave the World. To become a renunciant and forsake meditative activities as well as worldly activities will not free one from identification with the body and its other prenatal karmic tendencies. A renunciant who has satisfied by merely withdrawing from the world and who makes no definite effort to reach God through meditation does not attain the ultimate goal. But whether a yogi is living in the world as a family man or away from the world as a renunciant, if he learns the right technique of meditation from a true guru and diligently practices it, and lives rightly, in time he will burn away all the stored up evil tendencies of past lives and become freed to unite with God. In stressing dutiful actions, this stanza of the Gita is an admonition addressed especially to monks and all renunciants who leave the world in order to live in an endowed hermitage and there pass the same time in eating, sleeping, reading, and chanting, doing very little uplifting work for themselves or others. Such monastics are bound to be idlers. They live on the earnings of the hard-working worldly man without fulfilling their duty to give in return spiritual or material service. Funny how that works in so many religions. The inactive man does not do his duty to his creator or to the society that maintains him. The recluse who devotes his entire life to sincere efforts in meditation fulfills part of his duty by trying to find and love God, and thus spiritualizes his own life. To improve oneself is to help society by the example of virtue and by making at least one of its members good. So, yes. We have someone in the chat who earlier wrote, "We live in a society," so this is a good kind of response to that, right? But the yogi, monastic, or householder who does his duty to God and also to the world through some form of uplifting service is the most highly evolved type of being. He becomes a master, a siddha, when by such dutiful actions he attains to the supreme inactive state, nirvikalpa, God union, which is free from karmic effects of actions and is filled with the bliss of spirit. Next section here, the nature of right action, performing all works as oblations, yajna. And this is definitely something I've been mentioning here and there. Verse 9, quote, worldly people are karmically bound by activities that differ from those performed as yajnas, religious rites. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, labor thou, non-attached, in the spirit of yajna, offering actions as oblations, unquote. And I have to take another sip here. Continuing, worldly people perform actions with selfish motives and the desire to gain material profit and happiness. Owing to that inclination, they are karmically tied to the earth throughout successive incarnations. The yogi, however, strives to perform good actions in a spirit of selflessness and non-attachment. He thereby quickens his evolution towards soul freedom. All such liberating divine duties may be termed yajna. The word yajna has many meanings. It refers not only to the act of ritualistic worship, but to the sacrifice or oblation offered to the sacred fire. It is also the fire itself, the deity Vishnu, to whom the offering is made. Yajna is any selfless act or sacrifice offered solely to God. It is the religious rite in which the soul offers itself as an oblation in the fire of spirit. Now, let's say, I just want to throw this out. So in the near future, I'm definitely going to be putting out more presentation, actual like documentary style videos about this whole connection. I think that these people have with the Phoenicians or whatever, because this is something you see a lot, these fire offerings. And one of the things that's interesting is that they claim that they sacrifice children or whatever to the fire, when you have a lot of actual scholars who have now, basically shown that this is not necessarily saying that. And but you see these ideas played over and over again in these ancient texts, right? It's this idea that you are basically burning your sins within that spiritual fire. And I also definitely did that audiobook of way early on called The Philosophy of Fire, which is pretty fascinating if you guys want to check that one out at some point. But continuing, I just wanted to point that out, that this is something it's a theme that seems to happen in a lot of these ancient religions, and I think a lot of people have gotten it mixed up because people tend to be more materialistic in their perspectives on these things rather than trying to look at it as a spiritual book, which of course will be allegorical. So yes, continuing, a number of fire offerings are described in the Hindu scriptures as follows. The Pitri Yajna, offering oblations to ancestors, i.e. past, essence of whose wisdom illuminates man today. Number 2, Niri Yajna, offering food to the hungry, i.e. the present responsibilities of man, his duties to contemporaries. And number 3, Buddha Yajna, offering food to the animal kingdom, i.e. man's obligations to less evolved forms of creation, instinctively tied to body identification, a delusion that affects man also, but lacking in that duality of liberating reason which is peculiar to humanity. Thus the ceremony of Buddha Yajna symbolizes man's readiness to succor the weak. as man in turn is comforted by countless solicitudes of higher unseen beings. Humanity is also under bond by rejuvenating gifts of nature herself, prodigal in the earth, sea, and sky. The evolutionary barrier of incommunicability among nature, animals, man, and astral angels is thus overcome by offices of silent love. The Deva Yajna, offering life current from the senses as sacrifices to soul sight. This, quote, rite to the gods, unquote, is performed by advanced yogis as a preliminary step to the fifth rite. Brahma Yajna, offering the soul on the altar of the all-pervading spirit. This finality is attained only after faithful performance of preceding four ceremonies, which inwardly as well as outwardly acknowledges man's debt to 1 past, 2 present, 3 worlds of lower beings, and 4 worlds of higher beings. Thus proving his fidelity to creation, man is fit to touch the hem of the Creator's robe. And you notice this is 4 things, right? So another kind of cross type of motif. Let's see here. The subtitle of this section is Esoteric Meaning of Fire Rite Understood Through Yoga. Most people think of religious rites as the performance of ordinary ceremonies. Formal worship is better than worldly actions, but in itself it is not a bestower of wisdom. When the outward rite is observed with the proper chanting and concentration, it produces some result of peace, even in worldly people, because it diverts their minds from material concerns to the spiritual calmness within. But when such rites are habitually performed with absent-mindedness, they yield neither peace nor wisdom nor significant benefit of any kind. The formal rite in India of pouring into a fire a clarified butter, ghee, a form of fire-purified matter, is symbolical of uniting life energy with cosmic energy. The initiate in guru-given yoga meditation performs the esoteric real fire rite enjoined by the Hindu scriptures. He withdraws his life force from the sensory and motor nerves and pours that energy into the sacred fires of life gathered in the 7 occult cerebral spinal centers, the chakras. When the yogi switches off the life currents from the nerves, he finds his mind disconnected from the senses. This act of withdrawing life from the body and uniting that energy with the light of God is the highest yajna, the real fire rite, casting the little flame of life into the great divine fire, burning all human desire in the divine desire for God. Then the yogi takes his sense-withdrawn mind and casts it into the fire of cosmic consciousness, realizing finally his own soul as something entirely different from the body. He casts that self into the fire of eternal spirit. Next subtitle here of the next section. Exoteric meaning, desireless action offered to God. The true exoteric fire rite of life, by which the bodily life is united with the cosmic life, and human mind and soul are united with the cosmic mind and spirit, consists in offering right actions to God without desire or attachment. These followers of right actions performed as yajna do not remain tied to the earth, but are liberated. The blessed state of the Jivan Mukta, one who has overcome delusion and recovered his divine identity, becoming free while still incarnate, cannot be won by neglecting or running away from the duties of this life. By such unworthy conduct, a man ignores God in his aspect of Lord of the world. The true Jivan Mukta therefore makes a, quote, sacrifice, unquote, of his bodily powers in God's service, and thus works in sinlessness as his actions creating no new seeds of earth-binding karma. And that's very much what the description of Jesus is in a lot of ways, isn't it? Ordinary people who work in the factory of life with only their desires as tools and without any spiritual training receive mostly sorrow, just as an untrained mechanic who tries to handle an intricate piece of machinery gets hurt. The Gita therefore advises all men to perform the soul-redeeming activities of meditation, devotion, morality, service, and divine love as the observance of a purifying spiritual fire rite in which all mortal blemishes are burnt. Work actuated by selfish desires militates against the divine plan. The worldly man is inclined to perform wrong actions in obedience to entangling short-sighted ego. To fulfill his self-created, ever-increasing desires, the worldly man has reincarnated again and again until he is free. But the yogi who works to please God alone is already free, fulfilling his divine mission on earth. he becomes liberated. Even the spiritual fire rite of casting human ignorance in the flames of wisdom must be performed solely with the desire to please God, and not because of spiritual ambition. The divine man performs right actions for God only. His every act is a yajna. Yes, indeed. I agree with you. Hippocrates' matrix. For some, it's playing out by the book, and that's very true. And that's part of the thing about institutionalized religions. And while I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I was actually put through the whole ringer from when I was a kid all the way, till I was a teenager. And one of the things is that I can appreciate the pageantry behind it all, and the ritual, and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, after a long time, I just thought it was kind of just a pointless going through the motions kind of thing, because in essence, people go there and they don't even really understand the ritual in and of itself, which bothered me as well. So it's like, what's really the point? And then of course nobody really gets any spiritual. Most people don't get much spiritual advancement from that, because again, it's just kind of a sterile ceremony. You have a priest up there giving a homily, which is good. I'm not going to say that's not good, but in the end, there's no method of connection, right? So, anyways, continuing, verse 10, quote, Prajapati, Brahma as the creator of Praja or human beings, having made mankind in the beginning along with Yajna, said, quote, by this shalt thou propagate, this will be the milch cow of thy longings. I guess there's the section, he doesn't connect them, but so we'll just continue here. So that's the end of verse 10. From the beginning there was Yajna, the cosmic fire or light imbued with God's cosmic intelligence, from which the Lord's creative consciousness brought forth all human beings, souls made of cosmic intelligence, informed or individualized by God's creative light. The Creator Lord commanded, quote, thou shalt multiply thyself after the wisdom image in which thou art made. The divine wisdom within thee shall be the all-fulfilling milch cow, offering the milk of happiness to all thy desires, unquote. Let's see here. Of primordial creation, it is written in Genesis, quote, in the beginning God said, let there be light, and there was light, unquote. Inherent in this light is God's cosmic intelligence, Kuda Chaitanya, the Krishna or Christ consciousness. God's reflection in all creation. God's reflection in all creation. I need to take another sip. Quick. Okay. This intelligence is the upholder of creations, the first expression of God made manifest. In this sense, it is sometimes personified as Vishnu, the preserver. The Creator formed all human creatures after the image of his luminous preservative force, light, and intelligence, souls shining with the light of perfect wisdom. Expressing through the conscience in man, God commands, quote, ye shall develop and nourish thyself through the soul-born discrimination within thee, unquote. As the motherless child is nourished by the milk of the cow, so the devotee, orphaned without the contact of God, may feed all his mental powers with the milk of wisdom, drawn from his soul by discrimination. Man has the potential to direct himself always through inner guidance, in every phase of his material, mental, and spiritual life. This is the blessed truth. Quote, to err is human, unquote, is a comfortable, if invalid, excuse for a non-use of man's God-given faculty of discrimination. True. For the yogi, the milch cow of inner wisdom fulfills all his spiritual longings. During meditation, he beholds the, quote, yajna fire, unquote, of astral light, and receives wondrous spiritual perceptions and powers that fill him with inner joy. But the true aspirant does not remain content with these initial gifts of spirit from divine wisdom. Poured out through intuition, he begets those soul qualities and realizations of higher and higher states of consciousness, and receives finally the ultimate boon of emancipation in spirit, which quenches forever all accumulated desires of incarnations. Verse 11, which is the continuation, Prajapati continues, quote, "With this yajna, meditate on the Devas, and may those Devas think of thee. Thus communing with one another, thou shalt receive the supreme good." Then it continues some more, quote, and this is the interpretation section, quote, "The true inner fire rite performed in yoga meditation becomes attuned to the Devas, literally, quote, shining ones, unquote, the astral forces, angels, divine souls who, as God's cosmic agents, are instrumental in the governing of the worlds. To those in harmony with exacting laws of nature, the Devas respond favorably. Thus, continuing in this manner of attunement, thou wilt become eligible to unite with the formless spirit, creator of the astral deities who supervise the workings of his ordered universe," unquote. Among the customs of all ancient peoples were nature rites whose purpose was to acknowledge man's dependence on the natural forces and bounty of his environment. Instinctively, they recognized the debt and reverence owed to a higher intelligence working within the circumambient wonders. It is no coincidence that the godlessness prevalent in the modern age has spawned a civilization out of touch with the beneficence of nature. Couldn't say that any better. The God-given role of guardianship of the earth did not confer on man absolute sovereignty. His wanton domination is destructive of the very conditions necessary for his existence. The universal structure and man's infinite place in it are made possible only by the working together in precise harmony of an awesome combination of intelligent cosmic forces guided by Supreme Creator. A man would do well to put himself in attunement with these. For modern man to hold that the mathematical perfection of the universe could come about by chance is nothing but an expression of man's egotism, a loathing to concede that there could be something greater than he from which he only borrows his powers and intelligence and to which he owes his humble allegiance and worship. The Hindu masters of ancient times knew the art of worshipping and the special fire ceremonies and vibratory chants by which they could invoke the manifestations of the angels of God. Correspondingly, a literal interpretation of this stanza is that through fire oblations and chants properly performed, one should invoke and pay honor to the astral deities, superior to man in the order of evolution, who, through the divine laws of nature, carry on cosmic functions. Thus, man will create a good karma that will free his life from the hazards of sudden fruition of effects from unseen evil causes set in motion by him in the past. Let's see here. Materially minded people live their days by the, quote, sweat of their brows, unquote. Like a mule that carries a huge bag of gold, this treasure is not only of no use to the mule, through the animal's ignorance, but it is the cause of its active suffering from the burden of its weight. Worldly men, like the dumb animal, carry a heavy burden of material duties, suffering and fearing, but reaping little benefit from onerous labors. They only eat, sleep, earn, and procreate, giving not a single truly reflective thought to God or his spiritual government. When misfortune visits such men, they call it ill luck or fate. When good fortune smiles upon them, they say it is good luck or chance. Few realize that their lives are governed by the effects of past actions, karma, and that they are subjected to universal laws administered by higher forces. The Gita therefore points out that instead of leading an ignorant life, the average man should perform certain spiritual ceremonies, religious observances outlined by saints, to place oneself in harmony with high astral deities and the unseen laws they govern, thus bringing about conscious control of life's development. And the subsection here is titled Spiritual Understanding of Astrology. All planets and stars, for example, are in charge of divine astral beings. The influence on man from the heavenly bodies is the result of universal symbiosis, governed by the laws upheld by these higher beings. Planets and stars of themselves have no conscious power to guide or determine the destiny of man, but as the whole universe consists of and is held in existence by nature's creative vibratory power, each individual unit radiates a characteristic electromagnetic vibration that links it with other units in the cosmos. Depending on the interaction, these vibrations are productive of good or ill. And here's another subsection, relation of astrological forces to spinal chakras. This man is a miniature of the universe in which he lives. His basic composition, of which his physical body is merely a gross manifestation, is his astral body, formed from the thoughts of God and structured around and from the creative forces and consciousness in the spiritual eye and the subtle cerebral spinal centers. The spiritual eye has a correspondence with the cosmic sun, and the 6-12 bipolarity spinal centers, medullary, cervical, dorsal, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal plexuses correspond to the planetary influences represented by the 12 zodiacal signs of astrology. Now that is interesting. Let's see here. Exactly. Thoth, the Atlantean, makes a very astute comment here. This is the important part of astrology that pop culture astrologers never mention. Yes, exactly. Like so many things, right, that aren't mentioned, that are just, but funnily, it's out there, you know. Anyways, continuing, because this is fascinating. The astrological stars of a person are nothing more than but an environment that he himself has chosen by the karmic pattern he has fashioned by his past life actions. According to this karmic pattern, he is attracted to be reborn on earth at a given time that is favorable to the fulfillment of that pattern. In that sense, astrology is only a very poor way of finding out what one's past karma is. It is at best an unsure art when practiced by those who lack divine intuitive perception. I wrote at length about this in Autobiography of a Yogi, quote, Outwitting the Stars, unquote. Again, that's a great book. I just want to, throw that out there. It's it's a really great story. And, you get to know the author quite well and the kind of stuff he had to live through. Which gives you, for me, I give so much respect, especially after reading something like this, because he definitely went through a lot to be able to attain this kind of intuitive knowledge into these books. So, continuing, as commonly calculated today, an astrological chart is drawn for a person according to the time and place of birth. Even a slight inaccuracy in this data affects the accuracy of the chart. Further, one is actually, quote, born, unquote, at the moment of conception, when the soul enters the first cell of its new body. One's karmic pattern has already begun to unfold at that instant. The intuition of wise men, such as my guru Sri Yukswarji, who was masterful in astrology as the divine science it was intended to be, knows how to factor his, quote, birth at conception, unquote, into calculating a horoscope. In any case, it is not the stars themselves that control the happenings in man's life, but rather his individual karma that, when ripe for fruition, is affected beneficially or adversely by the electromagnetic vibrations of the heavenly bodies. The relation of the stars to the human body and mind is very subtle. The astral forces radiating to the earth from the heavens interact with those in the spinal centers that sustain man's body. Ignorant man does not realize how body and mind are changed through his good and bad actions, and how his actions affect positively or negatively the centers of the spine. Persons whose bodies and minds and material environment are out of order, the result of transgressions of spiritual law, have inharmony between the energies in the spinal centers and those radiating from the 12 signs of the zodiac. The true science of astrology, therefore, is mathematics of one's own actions, not the mathematics of the brainless stars. Karma governs the stars and one's destiny, but karma is governed by one's willpower. What is to be does not necessarily have to be. Man's free will and divine determination can change the course of events in his life, or at the least mitigate adverse aspects. One whose body and mind are very strong is impervious to adverse astrological influences. There may be no outwardly observable reaction at all, even when evil vibrations may be radiating from negative configurations of the stars. But if body and mind have been weakened by wrong eating, wrong thinking, bad character, and bad company, then the stellar rays have the power to activate latent harmful effects of past karma. On a cosmic scale, the combined karma of groups of individuals, social or racial groups or nations, for example, or the world at large, constitute the mass karma of the earth or proportions thereof. This mass karma responds to the electromagnetic vibrations of the earth's cosmic neighbors according to the same laws that affect each individual, thereby inducing beneficial or malevolent changes in the course of world and natural events. A store of good mass karma from living in harmony with divine laws blesses man. A store of good mass karma from living in harmony with divine laws and forces, blesses man's earthly environment with peace, health, prosperity. Accumulated bad mass karma precipitates wars, disease, poverty, devastating earthquakes, and other such calamities. Other times of prevalent negative vibratory influences, the individual must thus contend not only with his personal karma, but also with the mass karma affecting the planet on which he lives. I mean, this paragraph here, it's quite that's quite striking compared to what's happening right now and what's been happening for the past 100 years or so. But wow, let me take a quick sip here. Continuing. Therefore, it is beneficial to follow certain astrological injunctions based on the mathematical or orderly nature of the unified cosmos, if such advice is received from a self-realized sages and not from the superficial professional caster of horoscopes. Horoscopes tend to influence and paralyze the free choice of man's inherent divine will to conquer. Further, intuition is needed to read correctly the messages of the heaven and to interpret their significance in relation to one's individual karma. For guidance and support, it is far better to appeal to God and his angelic agents. Why look to the mute stars? From them, man can receive neither sympathetic response to his plight, nor personal succor in form of divine grace. Let's see here. When one is following God's path, to give too much thought to such lesser sciences as astrology is a hindrance. The highest way to create the right influences in one's life, the yogi's way, is to commune with God. All stars bow down before the presence of God. By meditation, the yogi reinforces the positive spiritual power in the cerebral spinal centers that are acted upon by the planetary influences. In this way, the yogi harmonizes body and mind with the universal laws and God's divine cosmic agent who governs them. And here's subsection titled Contact with the Devas or Angelic Forces. And yes, we have a comment here in the chat. Thoth the Atlantean, the world is ruled by lower chakras right now. I would say that it's a kind of a battle between the two at the moment, because there's definitely been an uptick to people who are searching spiritually, which is a big sign that it's not 100%. And at some point, I'm not sure if he's going to get into this or if he already did. I can't remember. But in India, they have what's called the yugas, which are the cycles. And it's the same cycles as the pre-Mayan, I believe, Inca calendar. So it's 12,000-year cycles, one ascending, one descending. And they're each set up in sort of different sections where there's a certain level of intelligence and enlightenment in each one. And Kali Yuga, which is the bottom of that cycle, is the most materialistic. And the thing is, there's a lot of controversy on which yuga we're in at the moment. The guru of Parahamsa Yogananda, Sri Yukswarji, actually wrote a book, which is very short. Maybe I'll do a small reading of that one. But he talks about how he thinks that they was miscalculated as far as the way the yugas were. And so he claims that we are just now coming out of the Kali Yuga. But there's always residual effects of having this total materialistic type of thing. But you remember in the 1800s, there was a big resurgence in spirituality, and the powers that be, the psychopaths at the top, our DuPonts and our Rockefellers and all those guys, and then of course the European families. They know about this, and so there was a desperate clamor and an attempt to basically take control of the entire medical and education system of this world, so that they can convince us of the kind of Darwinian Newtonian paradigm, and that we're all just a bunch of meat sacks and bones with blood, and that's all we are, and everything is all just by chance. And that's been the prevailing kind of mantra of these people, which has turned the entire world into this horrifyingly materialistic existence. So, anyways, before I get into this next section, I need to take a quick break because my cat is desperately crying for food, and it's been about an hour and a half. So I'll just put the break sign on real quick, throw on a little bit of sitarish music for you, and I'll be back between like 5 and 10 minutes. Okay. we go. We're back. Let me turn that music off. There we go. All right. All right. I think everything is working good. Let me just double check the sound. And yep. Okay, good. All right, let's get to it. Oops. All right, so the subsection here is contact with the Devas or angelic forces. Contact with the Devas by attuning to the consciousness to these higher forces and meditative elevates man, who may thus avoid the fructification of evil karma. Misfortune can be greatly lessened while the liberating effects of good actions are enhanced. Man and his astral preceptors in higher realms by mutual communion can find great and good controlled destiny. Okay. Eventually, by constant contact with spiritual forces, the devotee comes into harmony with the Supreme Creator, organizer of all higher and lower beings. Scriptures of all religions bear testimony to the intercession of divine beings between God and man. References to angels are common in biblical narratives of the life of Jesus. His birth was foretold to Mary by an angel of God. Angels heralded his nativity. He was protected from death decree of King Herod by an angel's warning to Joseph. When Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness, quote unquote, the angels came and ministered unto him. When he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, before his arrest and crucifixion, quote, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. There appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him, unquote. And when he was taken into custody by soldiers sent to arrest him, he declared, quote, Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled? And thus it must be, unquote. When Christ's disciples were in prison, quote, the angel of the Lord by night opened the prison door and brought them forth, unquote. In the Old Testament also were frequent references to God's aid to man through angels. When Abraham was commanded as a test to sacrifice his son, quote, the angel of the Lord called out unto him out of heaven, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine own son, from me, unquote. Elijah in the wilderness, as was Jesus, was ministered to by an angel of the Lord, quote, as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he did eat and drink and laid him down again, unquote. As God personified himself in the soul of every human being, so too, to fulfill his purpose in creation, he personified in many divine forms his multifaceted personality as the creator, through which to govern the universal structure. Joining the ranks of these God-manifested angels and deities are the souls of liberated human beings whom freed choose not to dissolve their natures in the infinite, but to remain in the higher realms of creation to work for the upliftment of still evolving soul. Let's see here. Communion with Devas, or Shining Ones, is not to be misunderstood as the spirit communion of spiritualists. Truly divine ones cannot be contacted by this means, only by lifting one's own consciousness through the right method of meditation to the higher spiritual realms of the astral heaven, home of the divine forces that uphold the material world, can such attunement with the deities be realized. This worldly man, unable consciously to commune with astral deities, gains the same result by associating with earthly angels, true God-knowing saints, and by following their counsel. A deeper interpretation of this stanza can be understood only by advanced yogis. It follows, withdraw the life force from the muscles, efferent and efferent nerves, heart, and other bodily activities, and unite it with the subtler astral nerve currents in the spine. The subtle centers in the coccygeal, sacral, and lumbar, dorsal, cervical regions, where enthroned respectively are the 5 astral angels: Ganesh, god of success; Shakti, god of power; Surya, creator, god of fire; Vishnu, god of preservation; Shiva, god of dissolution. In this subsection is called Receiving Blessings from the Deities in the Spinal Chakras. These deities, as differentiated forces of God's creative consciousness, sustain the human body and are not else than diverse manifestation of the one spirit. So, and I've said this many times on many different streams and videos, is that this idea that this polytheism was a polytheism was true for the common folk, but in reality, it's all just an explanation of exactly what they're explaining here. And that all these things, all these different gods are just aspects of the one, And it's the same thing, very close to the same idea when it comes to all these other scriptures as well. So as far as when you see lots of different gods. Anyways, continuing. The yogi should let the life current automatically flow from the lower spinal centers to the higher ones by mental pushes of concentration. He should never be unduly attracted to the beauty of one center, for thus his attention would remain locked there, unable to proceed to the medulla and the cranial or highest center. The five spinal deities are the temporary manifestations of spirit and man. In time, they are dissolved in the higher centers of consciousness. After the yogi can direct his life force to the throne of light occupied by each of the five temporary deities, he learns to withdraw the current and unite it in the medullary center in the kudastha or Christ center at the point between the two eyebrows, the single or spiritual eye where the changeless spirit dwells on the thousand-rayed throne in the cranium, the principal seat of the individualized spirit or soul. In the astral withdrawal of life force, the yogi perceives his blue life current commingling with the variously colored currents in the five spinal centers, and is also cognizant of the different states of consciousness resident in and characteristic of each center. In the astral withdrawal, the yogi is principally concentrated on visible lights and other phenomena. But during a higher or spiritual withdrawal of mind from the body through the centers, the yogi, after experiencing the outstanding states of consciousness present in the five regions, then unites the current with the Christ consciousness prevailing in the spiritual eye, the medullary center in the back of the head, and the kudastha Christ consciousness center in the forehead are two poles that act in conjunction and are thus often referred to as one center, the ajna chakra. The yogi who has reached this goal, the kudastha center, is then able to unite himself with cosmic consciousness. Perceived in the brain as the starting point, he then feels his mind united simultaneously with kudastha Christ consciousness, present throughout all vibratory creation, and with cosmic consciousness, which exists beyond the limits of any vibratory phenomena. In the superior spiritual withdrawal, even though the yogi may perceive lights and astral beings, he dissolves them into the different states of consciousness in the spine. He first unites his mind with semi-consciousness, subconsciousness, and superconsciousness in the three lower spinal centers, coccygeal, sacral, and lumbar, then lifts his mind to unite it with a higher state of superconsciousness present in the dorsal cervical regions. Then he unites himself with the kudastha, Christ consciousness, the omnipresent mind in creation, and finally with cosmic consciousness, the absolute spirit in the vibrationless realm beyond creation. Lord Buddha's ascension to enlightenment, as his consciousness rose through the dark illusions and temptations of earth, then through the heavenly spheres of the Devas, experienced as the yogi unlocks the mystery doors of ascension in the spine, is wondrously described by the masterful pen of Sir Edwin Arnold in The Light of Asia. And quote, "In the middle watch, our Lord attained abhijna, insightful, vast, ranging beyond this sphere to spheres unmanned. He saw those lords of light who hold their worlds by bonds invisible, how they themselves circle obedient around mightier orbs, which serve profounder splendor star to star, flashing the ceaseless radiance of life, from centers ever shifting into know at uttermost these are beheld with unsealed vision, and of all those worlds, measureless unto speech, whereby these wax and wane, whereby each of his heavenly host fulfills its shining life and darkening dies. But when the fourth watch came, the secret came, the outcome of him on the universe grows pure and sinless, either nevermore, needing to find a body and a place, or so informing what fresh frame it takes. In new existence that new toil proves, lighter and lighter not to be at all, thus finishing the path, blessed nirvana, sinless, stirless rest, that change which never changes." This interpretation, then, is the higher meaning of this stanza. The yogi must first attain conscious attunement, communion, with higher forms of consciousness in the various spinal centers, and thus become eligible to unite with the higher good, the spirit in creation as kudastha chaitanya or Christ consciousness, and beyond creation as Brahma chaitanya or cosmic consciousness. Verse 12. Quote, actually, let me take a quick drink. So verse 12, quote, Prajapati concludes, "The Devas commune with by yajna will grant thee the craved-for gifts of life. He who enjoys benefactions of the universal deities without due offerings to them is indeed a thief. All life's processes are controlled by the inner or astral deities with the divine fire rite of meditation. Every man thus should seek attunement with these, quote, shining ones, unquote. You should worship with the offering of respectful devotion these enriching influences or agents of God for bounties of life, health, knowledge, prosperity, receiving according to one's individual karma. Materially minded persons who thoughtlessly accept the gifts of life without conveying in some way their respect to the giver are ingrates indeed, pilferers before a shrine. Let's see here. The subsection here is called Reverence for cosmical agents of whom all life depends. As the absolute verity is abstract beyond the comprehension of ordinary men, these should reflect upon the cosmic angels sleeplessly laboring for universal maintenance, whose conceptual formulations are within the scope even of unlettered peasants. The mythology and folklore of every land are rich in personifications of these potent intercessionary influences. That's exactly what I was saying earlier, right? Gross man seldom or never realizes that his body is a kingdom governed by Emperor Soul on the throne of the cranium, with subsidiary regions in the 6 spinal centers or spheres of consciousness. This theocracy extends over a throng of obedient subjects, trillions of cells endowed with a sure, if seemingly automatic intelligence by which they perform all duties of bodily growth, transformations, and dissolutions, and 50 million sub-astral thought, emotions, and variations of alternating phases in man's consciousness in a lifespan of 60 years. Of course, that's much longer nowadays. And any apparent insurrection in the human body or mind against Emperor Soul manifesting as disease or irrationality is due not to disloyalty among the humble subjects, but stems from past or present misuse of man of his individuality or free will, given to him simultaneously with a soul and revocable never. Each man's intellectual reactions, feelings, moods, and habits are circumscribed by effects of past actions, whether of this or a prior life. Loftily above all influences, however, is his regal soul. The human being seeks a more spiritual consciousness should not withhold a natural expression of gratitude for the possession and functioning powers of his bodily temple, for the forces that throb in his heart, circulate in his blood, speed his digestion, condition his telephonic nervous system to receive and transmit all communications among soul, body, and astral and outward world, and direct the metabolic, crystallizing and assimilating, procreative and eliminative functions of his body, the ramifications of thought and will in his brain, and the emotional responses of his heart. Wow, that was a long sentence. Man identifying himself with a shallow ego takes for granted that it is he alone who thinks, wills, feels, digests meals, and keeps himself alive, never admitting through reflection, only a little would suffice, that in his ordinary life he is not but a puppet of past actions, karma, and of nature, directed and controlled by intelligent deities. Man is thus out of touch with universal harmonies and is little better than a lawless pirate, rendering no homage to countless forces that mercifully provide for the whole of his allotted span. Ancient scriptures, for this reason, extol the value to man of some form of worship that would acknowledge his indebtedness to cosmical agents on whom depends the proper functioning of all life. By such reverence, man finds the outward effects of already performed evil actions much lessened, since ignorance of true causes is also lessened. The Gita in this stanza tries to inspire man that he, quote, be not like dumb, driven cattle, unquote, on the road of life. Universal perceptions arise when man strives to understand the powers that work in the silent humility of all nature and behind his body and his mind in conformance with the rulings of Emperor Soul. Each one should know he has been born not solely owing to the compulsions of past actions, but primarily because God created him as a soul, dowered with individuality and therefore essential to the universal structure, whether in the temporary role of pillar or parasite. Interesting, they use the term pillar here. Each one should understand that death comes not only as the cumulative effect of past action, but also by the secret decree of deities in the subtle spinal centers. They work on God's will to remove a man from earth for at least an invigorating space, his duties of that life being terminated normally by righteous fulfillment, or premature by destructions caused by his evil tendencies, oft hidden from the causal light. This next subsection, Kriya Yoga, the real fire rite extolled by the Gita. A higher, more esoteric interpretation of the Gita stands as counsel to yogis that life force can be withdrawn from enslavement to body and senses to be united with liberating subtle currents and forces in the 7 cerebral spinal shrines. Or churches, if you will, right? Lives of such yogis are influenced not by effects of past action, but solely by directions of the soul deities. These enable aspirants to avoid the slow evolutionary monitors of egoistic actions, good and bad, of common life, cumbrous and snail-like to the eagle hearts. Interesting. The superior mode of soul living frees the yogi emerging from his ego prison. He tastes the deep air of omnipresence. The thraldom of natural living is, in contrast, set in a pace humiliating. Conforming his life merely to the evolutionary order, a man can command no concessionary haste from nature. Though he live without error against the laws that govern his body and mind, he still requires about 1,000,000 years of masquerading incarnations to attain final emancipation. The telescopic methods of a yogi, disengaging himself from physical and mental identifications in favor of soul individuality, are therefore commended to those who eye with revolt 1,000,000 years. This numerical periphery is enlarged for the ordinary man who lives in harmony not even with nature, let alone his soul, pursuing instead unnatural complexities and offending in his thoughts and body the sweet sanities of nature. For him, 2 times 1,000,000 years can scarce suffice for liberation. By practice of Kriya Yoga, deep meditation, and in guidance of an enlightened guru, a determined soul can accomplish 1,000,000 years of evolutionary unfoldment within the space of 48 or 24 or 12 or 6 or even 3 years, according to the adamants of his efforts and quality of his past karma. By Kriya, the outgoing life force is not wasted and abused in the senses, but is constrained to reunite with subtler currents in the astral spinal centers. By such reinforcement of life force, the yogi's body and brain cells are electrified with spiritual elixir. Thus he removes himself from studied observance of natural laws, which can only guide him by circuitous means as given by proper food, sunlight, and inoffensive habits, to a 1,000,000-year goal. It needs 12 years of normal, healthful living to effect even slight refinements in brain structure. 1,000,000 solar returns are exacted to purify the cerebral tenement sufficiently for manifestation of cosmic consciousness. This, then, is the real yajna, or fire rite mentioned in the Gita. The life current is in the senses is withdrawn and united in the vaster flame of the light of spirit, present in the main brain region and in the subdynamos of the spinal centers. The fire ceremony alone can give true knowledge to one who understands how to practice it, and differs much from the little effective outward fire rites, where perception of truth is oft burnt, to chant accompaniment along with incense. The true yogi, withholding his mind, will, and feeling from false identification with bodily desires, uniting them with superconscious forces in the 7 cerebral shrines, thus lives in this world as God hath planned. He is impelled neither by impulses from the past nor by fresh motivations of human witlessness. Receiving fulfillment of his supreme desire, he is safe in the final heaven of an inexhaustibly blissful spirit. This is indeed the true fire ceremony in which all past and present desires are fuel consumed by the love for God. The ultimate flame receives the sacrifice of all human madness, and man is pure of dross. His metaphorical bones stripped of all desirous flesh, his karmic skeleton bleached in the antiseptic sun of wisdom, and inoffensive before man and maker, he is clean at last. O man, offer thy labyrinth belongings into the monotheistic bonfire consecrated to the unparalleled God. Burn desire for human affection in the fire of aspiration for God alone. A love solitary become omnipresent. Throw bundles of sticks. Throw bundles of sticks of ignorance into incandescence, the blaze of insight. Devour all sorrows and for God's absence. Consume all regrets in meditative bliss. Verse 13. quote, saints, those who eat the remnants of due fire offerings, yajna, are freed from all sin, but sinners who make food just for themselves feast on sin, unquote. So you should bless your food when you eat it, right? To eat after offering the food to the giver is an act free from the bindings effects of moral karmic laws. Those who live, eat, and behave like mortals, oblivious to the spring of infinitude within, remain under the compulsions of the law of karma, which causes suffering and rebirth. During a fire ceremony, as enjoined by Hindu scriptures, a fire is built into which the worshipper pours ghee, clarified melted butter, and other symbolic items of nourishment while uttering certain awakening vibratory chants. Offering these to God and to the various deities who govern the human body and the cosmos, though neither God nor the angels eat mortal food, they receive the gift of the devotional attention and concentration of their devotees. When an offering is made of flowers or incense or flame from oil lamps or candles on the altar, they represent the devotion of man to God. The flowers symbolize the fragrant love of the devotee. The incense conveys reverence. The flame typifies the light of calmness in which is revealed the divine deity, residing on the altar of the heart. And isn't that interesting? This flame, I'm going to read this again. The flame typifies the light of calmness, which is revealed the deity, the divine deity, residing on the altar of the heart. And what do we have in these classical paintings of Jesus, and with him and his flaming heart? Interesting. Anyways, continuing, the Gita thus points out that a true devotee eats food only after having performed the outer ritual of a fire ceremony or having inwardly offered the food directly to the Creator. Worldly people who eat without thanks commit a sin of ignorance, forgetfulness of the giver. A subsection titled Kriya Yoga, Astral Way of Feeding the Body Cells. However, the real or inner fire ceremony to which this verse refers is the uniting of life with the greater life by practicing of pranayama or Kriya Yoga, the technique of life control, and, quote, food, unquote, refers to the divine cosmic energy imbibed from this inner rite. In sleep, the bodily life retires into the fires of spinal centers. This is an unconscious performance of the fire ceremony, in which the sleeper is made to unite his life current with the superior currents in the spine. He thus unknowingly moves towards the cosmic energy that sustains all life. By life control technique, the yogi consciously retires his life current from bodily muscles and from the heart into the spine. With the awakening of the spinal centers, he saturates and feeds all his bodily cells with undecaying light and keeps them in a magnetized state. This practice makes the body healthful, filled with divine life, as the yogi realizes that the body too is a shadow of the infinite energy and can be transmuted into it. This is the astral way of feeling the body's cells, superseding the lower method of using physical food and oxygen. By the astral method, the body can remain magnetized or in a suspended state, registering no decay. Prana, the divine life energy in the body, is the subjective intelligence worker in all the bodily cells. It is the quote-unquote soul of the cells. Outgoing life, which as pure prana is spiritual and subjective, becomes dependent on food and breath when it is identified with matter. But ever since this intelligent life energy was projected as vibratory force from the soul into the body, it has been trying to spiritualize the body cells, while gross food and breath as secondary sources of life keep the cells matter-bound in the domain of change and death. Prana subjectively preaches the soul's message to the cells and works to awaken in them divine consciousness of immortality. When in the astral fire rite, the pranic current withdraws into the subtle centers of the spine and brain, then instead of wasting its energies on performing matter-bound cells, the freed, reinforced prana awakens those cells with divine life by baptizing them with light of spirit. For the determined yogi, the time may come when, through discipline of the cells by the practice of pranayama, he will be able to live unconditioned by food or breath. When his soul will manifest life in the body in perfect freedom from the limited laws of nature, the soul will no longer have to obey or suit the conditions of the body, but can command the body as a servant to accept any condition it chooses to impose upon it. Subsection title, Kriya frees man from bodily laws that govern mortal beings. The body of man, however healthy or observant of natural laws, has to die and decay unless it becomes spiritualized, which immortalizes the body if the soul so wills. Certain yogis can thus keep their bodies indefinitely. My Supreme Master, Mahavatar Babaji, has a young body preserved for many centuries through this system of astral feeding. To use food to replace decaying material in the body involves constant changes in the physical cells, which ultimately give up their limited power of absorbing food, deteriorate, and die. By the astral way, the yogi performs the astral fire ceremony, feeding his cells with immortal fire. Such as a yogi becomes free from the sins of the bodily laws of action, karma, that governs every mortal being. The yogi can register even immortality in his body by transmuting its cells into energy. Certain yogis, like Elijah and Kabir, converted their bodies into astral currents and merged them into the cosmic light without having experienced the ordinary phenomena of death. Worldly people digest food in the mortal way and thus witness death, result of the sinful habits of living in ignorance of God and his cosmic laws and creative forces. The divine yogi unites his soul with God by ecstatic meditation. He saturates his body cells and all his thoughts with the joy of God. Beginners who meditate feel great joy, but when they have concluded their meditation, they again become identified with their mortal bodily habits. Men who unite their minds with sense pleasures, eating the food of various sensations to satisfy the human ego, become easily dissatisfied and suffer from disillusionment, the inevitable outcome of all temporary enjoyable pastimes. Such actions are karmically binding, but advanced saints, united with God, spread their joy over all the actions of daily life. Such yogis no longer live like human beings, but as God-men. By substituting divine joy for human happiness, they become completely free from the human law of karma and rebirth, forever nourished by God's bliss. Verses 14 and 15. From food, creatures spring forth. From rain, food is begotten. From yajna, the sacrificial cosmic fire, rain issues forth. The cosmic fire, cosmic light, is born of karma, divine vibratory action. Know this divine vibratory activity to have come into being from Brahma, God's creative consciousness, and this creative consciousness to derive from the imperishable, the everlasting spirit. Therefore, God's creative consciousness, Brahma, which is all-pervading, inherently and inseparably present in yajna, the cosmic fire or light, which in turn is the essence of all components of vibratory creation, unquote. And this is the commentary part, quote, food is the fountain of life, and rain is the stream that brings forth body-sustaining food. Cosmic fire, cosmic light, the quintessence of matter, condenses into the enlivening rain. The cosmic vibration, the creator of cosmic light, throbs out of the heart of Brahma, the creative consciousness of God, immanent in creation. The supreme cause from which evolve these successive links in the chain of creation is the soul imperishable, the everlasting spirit beyond creation. Spirit's reflection in vibratory creation as the divine creative consciousness is omnipresent, indivisibly inherent in every part and particle of the manifested universe, unquote. These stanzas describe the entire law of creation, the outward evolution of creation from spirit into cosmic vibration, and the condensation of vibration as light into man and the universe as causal, astral, and physical forms. All living creatures evolve from matter, earth, quote-unquote food, as every form of material life and life-sustaining nourishment issues forth from primordial ocean of gathered waters or liquids, rains, that formed as the earth solidified from gaseous nebulae, so in turn the nebula and all inanimate and animate matter were precipitated from the ocean of gathered rains of astral cosmic energy, which is the essence of atoms, electrons, and other elemental particles of matter. The quote-unquote rains of astral cosmic energy stream out of the cosmic light, yajna, and cosmic light, or fire, results from the ordered vibration or will of God, cosmic karma, or vibratory activity. The Bible puts it thus, quote, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, being of the finest expression of vibration or God thought. And darkness, Maya, that divides the one into the many, was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God vibrated his active will upon the face of the waters, creative elements. And God said, let there be light, and there was light, unquote. And I think that's a pretty an interesting and I would consider correct interpretation of that line, but I'll let you guys think what you guys want to think about that. So the subsection here is called "From God's consciousness came cosmic light and all creation." The cosmic vibration and laws of action, karma, which govern the universe, came from the Brahma or Christ consciousness, Kudasta Chaitanya, God's infinite intelligence inherently present in all vibratory creation. This consciousness of God, the Son, Tat in Sanskrit, and Om Tat Sat is their sort of idea of the trilogy here. So this consciousness of God, the Son, Tat, immanent in all vibratory creation, sprang from the immutable God of the Father, Sat, existing beyond all vibratory creation. The Christ consciousness, or creative Brahma, being a reflected consciousness and existing in relation to the cosmos, is therefore a temporary manifestation, dissolving in spirit when, at the time of cosmic dissolution, all creation resolves back into the absolute, the soul, imperishable. Within the Brahma creative consciousness is the Mula Prakriti, uncreated or undifferentiated nature, which holds the seed of all creation. Through the outflowing vibratory activity, karma of God's will in the form of intelligent creative cosmic vibration, Aum or Amen, or the Holy Ghost, the quiescent or Mula Prakriti is differentiated, and as various vibratory forces and energies are now active, Prakriti brings into manifestation the multiform creation. The intelligent cosmic vibration has two properties: cosmic light, yajna, creative fire, or light, quote, ethereal, first of things, quintessence, pure, unquote, and the cosmic sound of Om. The Om, or Amen, or Holy Ghost, are all significations of the cosmic vibration. All are the quote, unquote, witness or evidence of the Creator in His creation. Subsection is titled Man, the Microcosm, also born of the Cosmic Light. Relative to the creation of man, this verse may be explained as follows. The cosmic energy of the creative cosmic vibration is the immediate source of all life and life-sustaining food. Thus man, who is a microcosm of the universe, is a product of cosmic energy, of astral life current that became the condensed vibratory current of earth or matter, referred to in this verse as quote-unquote food. The gross outer sheath of the soul and of all matter is called Annamaya Kosha, literally, quote, the covering made from food, and refers to the physical body. Sorry, I just had to look at a text and it totally threw me. Okay, this gross or solid vibration of earth or matter sprang from and is in turn nourished by the subtler or liquid flowing vibrations of astral energy, referred to in this verse as quote-unquote rain. A rain nourishes the life of the earth, so astral life energy vitalizes all matter. The fluid vibrations of astral cosmic energy are condensations of the subtle cosmic fire or cosmic light, which is the essence, the building block of all things, and cosmic light is born from the intelligent creative cosmic vibration, Aum, or the Holy Ghost, the active vibratory will of God as the forces of Prakriti or nature in man. This ordered vibration, expression of divine law, springs forth from the soul, the individualized Brahma creative consciousness in man, and the soul is the reflected consciousness of spirit or cosmic consciousness. Thus, ultimately, man is made in the image of God, eternal consciousness. God's creative consciousness may be described as a dreamer who dreams the ideational, astral, and physical creation of man and the cosmos. The Creator dreamed, and the cosmos and man became dream realities in thought or idea form. From this ideational or causal dream, God made the astral energy creation. From the energy creation, God called forth the so-called solid universe and man with his illusory heavy body. The weight of the body, or a piece of clod, is a suggestion of God. The body as matter is in actuality an electromagnetic wave. Now, this is true and in terms of quantum physics. And when they actually, in the double slit experiment with, they're playing with photons, so, light particles, they definitely show the relationship between the observer and the observed, and how one is completely connected to the other. So, very astute by this gentleman, and the idea of intuitional knowledge should definitely be something I want to take seriously after reading this book, because he has definitely said a few things that he could never have really known about this, because science hadn't quite, it was starting to, but science hadn't quite gotten to some of these things by the time he wrote this book. So pretty interesting stuff. Continuing, in a dream one can think and work merely in thought or ideas, or work with dream electrical currents, or build dream houses out to dream bricks for dream people. In the dream state, there appears to be differentiation among the dream thought, dream electricity, dream brick houses for dream people, but on waking, the dreamer realizes that everything in his visionary world was nothing more than different vibrations and manifestations of his frozen mind stuff. From the unity of his dream consciousness came the all-illusory objects and events of his dream. Man is thus materialized mind of God. All creatures are informed or materialized from the, quote, frozen mind, unquote, of ideas of God. All illusions of solid matter came from the liquid astral energy or fluid frozen mind of God. This frozen liquid mind of God came from the cosmic energy as light or fiery frozen mind of God. The fiery frozen mind, okay? The source of this light is the active vibratory frozen mind of God, intelligent cosmic vibration, Holy Ghost, or Prakriti, which direct all laws of the entire illusory vibratory creation that is nothing but dreams of God. And interestingly enough, this is exactly expressed in the Course in Miracles book. Exactly. They don't call it Prakriti, but they definitely call it the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Ghost. That's part of the way that they break it down. But the way they just explain that is almost, it's not word for word, but it might as well be. Anyways, I read that book a couple of different times, and it definitely made a big difference in my life. So when I read these things and I see the connections, I'm going to spit them out here and there. Continuing, this active cosmic vibration of God came from the reflected consciousness of God, or Brahma, creative consciousness, Lord of all elusive creation. His creative consciousness, which mentally vibrated the cosmic dream creation, came from the original unchangeable cosmic consciousness, the uncreated, that exists beyond the vibratory or created realms. So, verse 16. Let me just take a quick drink and respond to this very important text. I'll be right back in 2 seconds. So verse 16, quote, that man, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, who in this world does not follow the wheel thus set rotating, living in iniquity and contented in the senses, lives in vain. All right, yeah, I think I got that. Unquote. Cosmic creation and man's place within it is a great revolving wheel of activity, descending from spirit and reascending to liberation. And again, okay, let me read this again, right? Cosmic creation and man's place within it is a great revolving wheel of activity, descending from spirit and reascending to liberation. Now, in the Old Testament, it's not a wheel, but Jacob's dream of the ladder of the angels going up and down is essentially speaking to the same thing here. I just want to point that out. Continuing, the benighted man, having descended and become intoxicated with the wine of sense pleasures and failing to climb aboard the ascending cycle of the wheel with its lawful disciplinarian activities of life, remains in the pit of sinful misery, rendering useless the purpose of his God-given life. He who does not heed the liberating laws laid down by his Creator misses the sole point of earthly existence. He who identifies himself with his senses is rooted in the soil of materialism. As a person who mounts a Ferris wheel can climb high and see a beautiful panorama or can climb down again, so a person who, instead of remaining stationary on the ground of materialism, climbs on the wheel of uplifting action can reach the high points in evolution. He is free to go to any world, whether the lower plane of earth or the rarefied regions of the Devas. The man who performs higher and higher duties rises steadily in the scale of evolution. The sense-identified person walks dually on the lowly levels of a material consciousness. His sorrow-producing error lies in not acquiring a standard of comparison which can only be found by mounting the rotating wheel of right actions. Such men never know the purpose of life, the search for the Holy Grail, the chalice of supreme bliss. And subsection is titled The Human Spine as the Descending and Ascending Wheel of Life. A deeper interpretation of this Gita stanza is that the human spine is the descending and ascending wheel of life. Again, Jacob's ladder. The consciousness of man has come down from its home in the cerebrum, descending through the 6 plexuses. After reaching the lowest or coccygeal center, consciousness spreads out in the nervous system and becomes responsive to the outer world. The soul descending into the flesh thus becomes entangled, remaining a prisoner of the momentary pleasure-producing sensations. The man who allows his consciousness to become saturated with the delusive pleasures of sensations finds that his life is vain and leads out to negation. The purpose of life is to ascend the 6 spinal centers, reinforcing the human consciousness progressively with greater and greater lights until it is able to unite with the all-pervading thousand-rayed brilliance in the highest center in the brain. This ascent of the consciousness through the spine may be achieved slowly through the right actions and right thoughts. The yogi, however, chooses the quicker and more scientific method of meditation. The soul in man has descended from cosmic consciousness to the immanent Christ consciousness and thence to the vibratory creation. It continued to descend until it became encased in a physical body, which is characteristically permeated with sense consciousness. When a man becomes a yogi, his soul consciousness begins to follow the path of ascension. It first leaves the soil of material attachments and concentrates away not only from objects of bodily enjoyment, but from the body itself. The good yogi detaches himself from the possessive consciousness and then from all sense identifications. Thus, he removes his mind from the 3 lower centers that connect man with all bodily sensations and attachments. The yogi then immerses his consciousness in the divine love radiating from the heart center. He ascends further to enjoy the cosmic calmness of the cervical center. Climbing on, the yogi rests in the Christ consciousness in the medulla and the point between the eyebrows. Here he experiences the joy and wisdom of God inherent and omnipresent in all vibratory creation. He finally stabilizes himself in the cerebral center of cosmic consciousness, the quote uncaused, unquote, infinite bliss beyond the cause-effect reciprocity of vibratory creation. The internal consciousness of ordinary people operates only from the lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal centers that direct all material sensory perceptions and enjoyments. The divine lovers and celestial poets work from the heart center. The calm, unshaken yogi operates from the cervical center. He who can feel his presence in the entire vibratory creation has awakened the medullary and Christ centers. The illumined yogi functions in the cerebral center or cosmic consciousness. He may be spoken of as an ascended yogi. The sense-identified man who knows nothing of his higher inner life is a descended one, a mortal conscious only of the lowest rung of human evolution. Verses 17 to 18, quote, "But the individual who truly loves the soul and is fully satisfied with the soul and finds utter contentment in the soul alone, for him no duty exists. Such a person has no purpose of gain in this world by performing actions, nor does he lose anything by their non-performance. He is not dependent on anyone for anything. A man identified with his body becomes the ego. The ego views, before I started with the man, that was the end of that particular verse. For those just listening, a man identified with his body becomes the ego. The ego views as reality the unreal world. When by yoga that man unites his soul with his soul, he beholds his life as a dream of God, in which the soul as individualized spirit is a participant. When by further advancement he finds supreme contentment by uniting his soul with unending bliss of spirit, he no longer has to perform any duties in the Lord's dream playhouse. He who realizes and manifests his soul's oneness with God and who can switch off his life current from the senses and unite his life with eternal life feels neither profit nor loss by keeping his senses working or not working. Dependent wholly on God, he has no karmic involvement with creation. The man, so this next section is titled, Dependent wholly on God, the yogi has no karmic involvement with creation. Continuing, the man possessing self-respect, remembering always that he is a child of God, protects and reflects that soul image by performing right duties and by behaving properly towards others. He follows an inner guidance, and as though automatically does does what is right morally, religiously, socially, and in every other way. Such people do not need others' counsels. Those who know how to command from others a spontaneous respect by reflecting true soul qualities and how to manifest towards others the respect due them as souls, for such illumined men no compulsion of karmic duties exists. The yogi who has discovered the ever-new joy in the soul by deep meditation is completely satisfied. He has found within a perfect happiness. He has found within a perfect happiness. He has achieved the purpose of life, fulfilled the duty for which he was born. In reuniting himself with God, he has automatically discharged all obligations to creation. A biblical story illustrates this point. Mary was completely satisfied to serve Jesus, a natural outpouring of the pure, intense devotion of her soul, transcending thought of her other duties, to Martha's dismay. Martha considered it necessary to put worldly duties first, hoping to please God through the path of outward good works. Christ, however, commended Mary for having chosen the better part, one that released her from the observances of all lesser duties. That's an interesting perspective on that particular story. All mortals who live and work solely for pleasure and gain, remaining ignorant of the divine purposes of life, are inexorably bound by their actions, elevated by performance of proper actions, and degraded by evil actions. But the yogi who has, by self-realization, attained the supreme goal of life is neither required to perform actions, nor, if he does, is he bound by any karmic results of such actions. Having fulfilled all his desires by attaining the all-satisfying supreme bliss of spirit, he possesses no motive for worldly gain through actions. Far above any selfish motivation, the accomplished yogi may engage in dutiful actions for the sole purpose of setting a good example to others. Some great yogis live and teach in the world just to demonstrate to mankind the way to freedom, while others illumined masters remain aloof, never mixing with the world. I myself prefer the first kind of yogi, the one who shares with others his divine lore. Yet he can understand the yogi who wants only to be with God and not to mingle in the world, for he knows whether or not his ever-present Lord wants him to work in ways other than meditation and silent intercession to uplift and save others. Many self-appointed religionists try to, quote, save souls, unquote, without having saved themselves. Boy, isn't that true. God guides the enlightened yogi to action in the world or to complete withdrawal from it, and in either case, his spiritual attainment bestows its blessing on others. Righteous duty performed with non-attachment is godly. Verse 16, quote, therefore always conscientiously perform good material actions, karyam, and spiritual actions, karman, without attachment. By doing all actions without attachment, one attains the highest, unquote. The yogi who forsakes evil actions and performs noble material duties and meditative religious actions without selfish attachment is a worker for God and attains thereby union with Him. Worldly people work day and night to gain ephemeral material objects. The yogi becomes increasingly attached to spiritual actions and thereby displaces material desires by spiritual one. Then, says the Gita, when attachment to divine actions has produced contact with God, no one longer... Then, says the Gita, when attachment to divine actions has produced contact with God, one no longer has attachment even to spiritual actions. This is the meaning of, quote, performing all actions with non-attachment, unquote. All actions, as motions, are confined to the realm of vibration. Material action performed with desire material actions performed with desire lead one away from God, while spiritual actions lead one to God. After the devotee is united to the infinite, however, he has reached the vibrationless state beyond all action, which is actually technically called Siva, believe it or not. That which is not is what Siva actually means. And I believe he mentions this once in his book as a sort of quick admonition here, but we'll continue. Material actions are performed by engaging the life current in mind with the senses. Meditative actions are performed by withdrawing energy in mind from the senses. At first, the devotee must cultivate attachment to spiritual actions in order to banish attachment to material actions. Reaching the finality, however, the devotee is freed from all attachment, cause-effect involvements with creation. Verse 20, quote, by the path of right action alone, Janaka and others like him reached perfection. Also, simply for the purpose of rightly guiding mortals, thou shouldest perform actions." Unquote. Janaka, a noble king and an enlightened yogi of historical India, performed his proper worldly mission, good government of his subjects, and also accomplished the supreme duty enjoined on every incarnate soul, the attainment of God realization. Already perfected beings such as Janaka, who are no longer required to perform actions for their own evolution, continued nevertheless to engage in constructive actions in order to set a high example to society, whose members can be liberated only by good actions and not by unearned presumptuous inaction. The great saint Janaka was so strong-willed that he never permitted his intricate state duties to interfere with his supreme engagement with God. Ordinary devotees, on the other hand, inclined to overemphasize the necessity for performance of their worldly duties as a condition to happiness. Engrossed in these pursuits, they neglect meditation for the attainment of everlasting divine bliss. Idlers and error-stricken immature yogis, citing the actionless state some illumined yogis have attained, conveniently conclude that the supreme goal can be attained without action. The Gita therefore reminds them that King Janaka and similar saints attained perfection by right action, and neither by desire-influenced selfish actions or by the premature assumption of actionlessness. Continuing, the great yogis can keep the life force switched off from the senses in ecstasy so that the body is inert, corpse-like. They have attained complete control over the body by pranayama, life control techniques. They may forego that state part of the time. They may forego that state part of the time, however, just to illustrate to young yogis the necessity for performing certain duties in the divinely planned cosmic drama before they can reach the inactive state. Commenting upon stanzas 19 and 20, Swami Pranabhananda says that in them the difference between material action and spiritual action has been shown. Excuse me. Let me take a quick sip. So, quote, material actions are those that are performed in connection with the physical man, whereas spiritual actions are those that are performed in connection with the spiritual man, unquote. Physical actions are gross and tangible. Spiritual actions are real but subtle. The purpose of material actions is to acquire some material comfort in the world. The aim of spiritual actions is to find the soul. Quote, by material actions, cleanliness, right diet, and proper worldly behavior, the devotee purifies his body and makes it more harmonious for spiritual culture. But spiritual actions, dispassion to sense objects, love of soul, intuition, meditation, although intangible, are imperatively required to find the hidden power of the soul, unquote. It may appear to a devotee that the Gita's emphasis on non-attachment means even non-attachment to the soul. That interpretation is not valid because the misery-producing thorn of attachment to sensations can only be plucked out by the use of the sharp thorn of attachment to the divine love of the soul. Lahiri Mayasaya often quoted the great Rishi Ashtavakra's teachings, quote, if you want freedom from reincarnation, abhor sense pleasures as you would sugarcoat poison, and be as devotedly attached to acts of forgiveness, pity, contentment, love of truth and God as to drinking nectar, unquote. Verse 21, quote, whatever a superior being does, inferior persons imitate. His actions set a standard for people of the world, unquote. That's a pretty good quote. Knowing that examples speak louder than words, many masters, even after they have attained the ultimate and thereby transcended the circumscriptions of cosmic imperatives, nevertheless continue to observe the rules of right conduct and constructive action as a proper criterion for well-intentioned but unadvanced worldly people. By this mere presence, one who has reformed himself is able to reform thousands. Though he may not utter a single word, like a rose, he diffuses his fragrance to all. And I'm going to say just real quick on a personal level that that's so absolutely true. As I've progressed majorly, or just as I've progressed myself into my spiritual development over the years, I don't talk about any of this stuff with people. I just am who I am. And but I can say now that I absolutely have affected more than a few people over the course of the last 10 years, in just by the way I am, because people notice these things. especially people caught up in the trials and tribulations of life, they'll see somebody go through very similar things that don't have the attachment to what's going on. And so, I don't freak out about anything myself, which, in many ways drives my wife crazy. She claims that I don't care about anything. But I only care about things that are real. And, there's so much that's not real in this life. And I try to explain that to her. But it's one of those things where she's not quite where I'm at. And that's okay, and hopefully my influence over time will help her to see certain things. I know for a fact it's helped other people get over certain things and to see certain things in different ways. So, this is real, and just be aware that your personal energy is very powerful, one way or the other, whether you're kind of throwing out those negative vibes or positive vibes or that ethereal spiritual vibe. It's... it can be quite the difference in someone's life. And I've spoken about this before in many, many other videos and here and there, just comments that I make. But, realize that like all your actions are like little butterfly effects. The things you say, the way you look at someone, the actions that you do with people, no matter how small it is, you don't have no idea what the ramifications are and how that spreads through feeling, and someone else takes that and that does another action because of the fact that you may have sent something to them or whatever, good or bad, right? So, it's important to be constantly conscious of this kind of thing. It's part of like deconstruction of your ego kind of ideas and your thought constructs that are basically the building blocks of your ego. And you just have to kind of knock on one of those, each one of those building blocks down, one at a time. And that's how you get to this kind of daily kind of thought process. You do have to let go of these thought constructs that, you were programmed with, that you had no choice into, and some of the things that you allow to be programmed into you, and then some of the things that you yourself program into yourself. So it's, it's one of those things where, it's up to you, right? And like everything, like this entire book is talking about, you have your own personal war of Kurukshetra that you're fighting and that I'm fighting and that we're all kind of sort of battling. But the great part about it is we're all battling this thing together, right? It's all the same goal. It's all the same challenges. So it's really not implausible to think that one can really turn a lot of people on to a different way of life just by being the best possible spiritual self you can possibly be. So, don't sell yourself short in life because you have an inheritance that is more important than you could ever imagine. So keep that in mind and don't ever give up the fight. Okay, guys? I love all you guys. So continuing, the subtitle here says, one who has reformed himself is able to reform thousands. A man who has attained God could smoke or drink or eat meat, could marry and have children, all without losing his divine status. For this, and by the way, I just want that right there, that paragraph, that first sentence in this section. This is a lot of people point to Jesus drinking wine and eating meat and all that stuff. Well, there you go. He obviously had gone past any kind of thought constructs, so none of it matters because he recognizes all of it as just the same thing, right? So it's, you understand that all things are part of God, then, if you're eating a rock or some grass, it's all just the same. It's all just the same aspects of the same thing. But that's easier said than done, right? You have to be able to, like this book says, get complete control and then become completely unified in order to truly have that aspect within you, which is not explainable in words. Hence why this book is 1,300 pages long. Anyways, continuing. For the sake of setting an example, however, he would probably do none of these actions, but would continue his ascetic conduct because asceticism is imperative for yogi beginners. Persons of ordinary consciousness may reason, quote, Jesus drank wine and ate fish, therefore I will imitate those actions. I shall imitate his spiritual actions later, unquote. That's funny. I totally missed that was in this part, but isn't that funny? How readily people imitate any worldly habit of a master but must inevitably omit following his highest virtues if they are hidden in his soul and are not outwardly illustrated. Untrained disciples may reason, quote, Master does this or that with no ill effects. He doesn't meditate regularly, therefore I needn't do so, unquote. The disciples do not understand the spiritual state of a master. Once a master is one with God, he has attained the object of meditation, and thus no longer requires that sadhana, that spiritual practice. The aspiring disciple enjoys no such exemption. A devotee may say to himself, albeit perhaps unconsciously, quote, why shouldn't I follow Master's actions rather than his words, unquote. The Gita therefore reminds the, quote, superior individual, unquote, to be careful for the sake of others, since his meditations and practice of good habits are really a series of demonstrations for those who follow him, or even for those who watch him from a distance or otherwise hear of him. Worldly people are as quick to misunderstand the outward actions of a master as they are slow to grasp his divine message. Boy, isn't that the truth. Even though great masters sometimes ignore the rules established for novices, they can always prove to a true disciple that they are not attached nor affected by any material habit. I often cite the story of the meat-eating saint who, with equal ease, consumed and digested molten nails to chasten his non-understanding vegetarian disciple. The words of this stanza of the Gita can also be interpreted as referring to the powers rather than to persons. When the life force is withdrawn from the senses and transferred toward the brain, a sense of superior power ensues in which the inferior bodily sensations are dissolved. A yogi has learned that he must not keep the life force attached continually to the senses, or it will remain dictatorially habituated to the enjoyment of sensations. By ecstatic meditation, he withdraws his life force to the superior path of spine and brain, automatically causing all inferior senses to follow, that is, to be absorbed in the cerebral light. This experience occurs even in deep sleep, when all sensory perceptions are absorbed in the semi-conscious enjoyment of the soul. In the very deep state of dreamless sleep, the life force is switched off completely from any subconscious cognition of the outer world. Tuned in with supreme bliss, man's senses are revitalized, causing him to say upon awakening, quote, I had a wonderful sleep, unquote. Similarly, one can think of the mind as the superior force in the body. Whatever the mind sees and stresses will be blindly followed by the inclinations, moods, desires, and habits. They automatically put on the dominant habits and actions of the mind and reflect its salient traits. The supreme force of the mind must outwardly be kept busy in a routine of constructive actions, even while it is inwardly united to the supreme bliss. If the mind indulges in moods or anger, the senses will exhibit gloom or wrath. But if the mind is blissful, the senses too will register bliss. And this is very true on a biological level. If you guys have never heard of Dr. Bruce Lipton, you can check him up on YouTube or whatever. There are just unbelievable amounts of lectures at this point. But his book, The Biology of Belief, was a big stepping stone for me on my kind of spiritual searching for information. It's science-based because he's a biological cell scientist, cell biologist. And what he looks into is the study of epigenetics, which is a very interesting sort of quantum physics, genetics type of thing, where they talk about that environment, and not just the environment, physical environment, but your mental environment can actually affect the way that your genes work or turn on certain things, turn off certain things. So on a biological level, this is absolutely true. And if you guys want more of that information, I mean, his book, The Biology of Belief, was his first one. The second one was Spontaneous Evolution, which was also pretty great. And he's got a bunch of other things, but his lectures are pretty good. He's a fast talker, so. But if you guys are interested, definitely look him up. Bruce Lipton, like the tea. So he's definitely somebody to check out because he definitely bridges the science and the spirituality in a lot of ways. So. And, you know, his stuff has gotten better over the years. Anyways, continuing, verse 22, quote, A son of Pritha, Arjuna, no compelling duty have I to perform. There is naught that I have not acquired, nothing in the three worlds, remains for me to gain, yet I am consciously present in the performance of all actions, unquote. And here is the commentary section, or I'd say the kind of retranslation of these stanzas into more direct English. Quote, I am the cosmic beam that creates the various dream pictures of life, not from any necessity, but from a desirelessness desire to express myself as many dream forms. I am the ultimate. Nothing remains for me to attain in my dream dramas, for nothing is outside of myself. I continue, however, to produce my dream shows and to keep an active part in them, that my children, the individualized multiforms of my one being, may similarly act in them as divine beings and then return to me in my dreamless home of eternal blessedness, unquote. And that's very similar to this idea of the prodigal son allegory in the New Testament, right? Yes, the desireless desire. Thoth the Atlantean, that's right. It's one of those paradoxical things, right? So, I mean, they mentioned this earlier in this book, but this is the whole idea is that the goal of a meditation is God consciousness, and that is your desire, but in essence, you have to sort of almost give up the fruit of that labor in order to attain it. So that's where comes the desirelessness of your desire, in essence. It's part of the big paradox, right? That is sort of existent in a lot of these sort of high-end religious thought processes. It's definitely not something that's easily grasped. It's more or less experienced in my personal experience. I didn't understand that either long ago when I read those kinds of things, or when people would be like, "Oh, the universe is just an illusion." Like, I completely could not wrap my head around that until I eventually experienced it in pretty deep meditation myself. So it's I can totally get why something like that is a hard thing to sort of understand on a basic level, but it's not impossible to understand. Is all I'm saying. So, but thank you for the comment, because yes, that's definitely a good thing to point out for sure. Continuing, the infinite is the supreme cause behind all causation. All cause evolve objects. Krishna therefore says to the perplexed disciple Arjuna, quote, when you attain my consciousness, you will discover that the originating spirit has no obligatory duty to perform. The threefold creation evolved from my mind as an intricately organized pleasure ground, lila, play of the Lord, unquote. God, popularly conceived as the omnific creator and ruler of the universe, appears thus to most men to be in eternal motion or activity, only because they perceive creation through the delusory powers of the senses. The man of cosmic consciousness perceives God not only as a whirlpool of eternal motion, but as the vibrationless infinitude of eternal joy. This subsection is titled Learning to be Transcendently Calm and Simultaneously Active. The infinite is divided into two: the vibrationless sphere of the absolute, quiescent, unborn, self-contained, eternal, and the vibratory cosmos, wherein spirit dreams itself into the many. As the universe is not but God's dreaming consciousness, he is omnipresent therein, impartially witnessing and indirectly directing the order activity of creation as the cosmic intelligence, Kudasta Chaitanya, or Christ consciousness, and actively giving birth to all forms through his creative consciousness, the nature or Prakriti, or in the Shiva schools that would have been called Sakti, or Parvati, for that matter. Similarly, all human beings made in the image of God have a vibrationless, blissful soul within, and also the soul's guiding intelligence, and its pseudo-nature as the ego active in the mind, vital forces, and bodily activities. Every human being ought to behave like the spirit image he is, transcendently calm and locked in ecstatic bliss in his soul, and simultaneously active in the body without entanglement in delusive desire and their resultant karmic complications. Quote, the three worlds, unquote, refer to the triple cosmos: causal, mental, astral, energy, and physical, matter. God created all matter mentally, then he manifested the causal ideas as an astral or energy universe. Finally, he precipitated the astral life-forms into forms of the visible universe. The essential nature of matter is thus the mind stuff of God. By the law of relativity, he differentiated mind, energy, and matter so that they seem divergent, different. They are all as real and as unreal as the substance of dream. Through cosmic delusion, God makes us aware of seeming differences among the three forms of vibration: consciousness, astral energy, and physical substance. God knows the world as creation of his mind. He has no hopes or fears about it, but he continues to act in and through it that by reminders of his innate presence, his deluded children too may realize that this universe is never to be continued cosmic cinema serial, not to be taken seriously as a reality, but to be viewed as an entertaining and educational spectacle. Krishna encourages Arjuna to manifest his oneness with spirit instead of indefinitely remaining a beggar, frustrated by unfulfillment, dissatisfied with paltry crumbs of pleasure and insults of pain. By divine unity, the devotee understands that all things which belong to his Father belong also to him. He has regained the lost inward paradise. But, the Lord emphasizes, quote, even as I am non-attached to the cosmos and yet am present in every action, so each of my divine offspring must do some work to help my deluded creation and its mortals to come back home to me, unquote. All must work since the Lord of the cosmos has chosen to work, because it is the Almighty's desireless will to work in everything as cosmic intelligence. He realizes well that man and the vibratory life in all created atoms do not remember their oneness with spirit. What misery! Human beings and all particles of nature are therefore being helped by God and by each liberated saint to regain their lost memory. In this intercession, we find God's sublime assurance that all souls who went forth from him will return to him. That is why the divine intelligence, he continues to work through man's conscience and through the prophets who rouse man to his heritage by such beautiful wisdom as Jesus expressed in, quote, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, unquote. By using his unlimited soul force, God could act like a cosmic dictator and forcibly retire creation into himself. But since he has given all men free choice to accept him or to reject him, he works secretly and through his saints sweetly to persuade alienated mortals to come back to him. Again, a prodigal son, right? I'm reaching a different chapter here. Oh no, this isn't a different chapter. This is just a different section. Okay. All right, verse 23. O Partha Arjuna, if at any time I did not continue to perform actions without pause, men would wholly imitate my way, unquote. And here is the translated, more plain English version of this, quote, I, the creator of all things in the vibratory cosmos, am ceaselessly working, bringing worlds into being, keeping them balanced by the laws of attraction and repulsion, throbbing in human intelligence, heart, and activity. Through my colossal example and my having given man compelling responsibility for his soul, mind, body, family, country, world, I am unmistakably telling him that there is no salvation without proper activity on earth. Quote, all my human children made in my image and from whom I have built this ever-changing cosmic home must perforce act, even as I do. In atoms, stars, and all creation I work ceaselessly through my immanent intelligence, that all mortals be silently inspired and empowered to act intelligently and spiritually according to my cosmic plan. This plan has been revealed in scriptures by my illuminated children who, attaining me, know my wishes. If I upheld the universal structure, yet ceased to work in creation as the intelligent silent influence of goodness and righteousness, man too would cease to act rightly. Falling into degenerative sloth, he would neither progress himself nor help to promote the betterment of the world he lives in. He would be unable to come back to me because of the lack of active involuntary motion through which I work to push him and all nature upward in progressive evolution, aided when not hampered by the choices of his free will. I guess the quote just continues. But if I, the Creator, ceaselessly work to serve creation with my intelligence and influence of goodness, then my reflections, human beings, will perforce continue to help my creation to its goal of perfection, unquote. Verse 24, if I did not perform actions in a balanced way, these universes would be annihilated. I would be the cause of dire confusion. Quote within the quote, the improper admixture of duties, unquote. I would thus be the instrument of men's ruination. And that's the close of that particular verse. God, as the creator of universes, works immanently as the universal intelligence in matter and in human consciousness for the purpose of maintaining order while working out his cosmic plan. He says, quote, if I, the Father of all, did not act in creation, all universes would explode and vanish. My cosmic consciousness keeps the floating islands of planets swimming rhythmically in the cosmic sea. It is my intelligence, says Kudasta Chaitanya, or Christ consciousness, that consciously holds all atoms together and keeps them working in coordination. Quote, if I did not work through the lives of saints, balancing material duties with spiritual obligations, humanity without the presence of exemplary lives would lead unbalanced lives. Be confused about their duties and perish. If God removes his cohesive intelligence, all universes and beings would disappear from objectivity, just as the scenes and actors vanish from a screen when the light running from the film is shut off. Without the Lord's secret but active intelligence guidance, utter confusion would arise among men. Admixtures of duties would be the result, causing ruination. Many non-understanding people interpret the reference to admixture in this stanza of the Gita as a prescription against the mixing of castes or races. This interpretation reinforces blind orthodoxy and prejudice and foster divisions and strife. This verse does not support the caste system, nor does it refer to the admixture of ethnological races, or the basis of color, or any other basis. All human races and skin colors have come from one spiritual Father, God, and from first created human parents. It is right, therefore, that spiritual siblings should acknowledge their divine kinship. God has created a charming diversity of humanity in the olive-colored, dark yellow, red, and white races in order that man may solve the riddle of the apparent differences and please him by informing the United States of the world. By forming the United States of the world. Concerning castes, it may rightly be said that every nation has four castes or types. The four divisions are dependent on quality and have nothing to do with race or caste as these are understood today. As the Gita says elsewhere in chapter 4:13, quote, according to the differentiation of attributes and actions in man, I have created the four castes, unquote. This next section has a subtitle titled Four Steps in the Ladder of Self-Realization, each characterized by ennobling duties. All human beings confined to a physical body inherent at birth, the body identified kayastha, caste of Sudra, the two physical eyes reveal to man nothing but an outer world of duality. After a spiritual initiation by a guru, a devotee learns to open his spiritual eye, and by cultivating wisdom he enters the caste of a Vaishya, and then by fighting the senses he rises to the higher caste of a Kshatriya. Eventually attaining God realization, he becomes a Brahmin, one with Brahman spirit. In a material sense, all nations recognize the natural division of castes according to ability, vis-a-vis the laborers, Sudras, the businessmen, Vaishyas, the soldiers, Kshatriyas, and rulers, and the teachers and clergymen, which is Brahmins. A laborer can become a businessman or a soldier or a clergyman. Therefore, these four groups are interchangeable on the material plane. The vested priesthood, not the sages, in India, have fixed the four castes as non-interchangeable in defiance of early Vedic teachings about natural and progressively interchangeable castes. Even today, however, a Hindu who adopts the religious path is considered beyond caste, unquote, quote unquote. He receives from his guru a spiritual initiation in which he casts off his old self with all of its egoistic identifications of family, name, possessions, and desires, and receives a new, quote-unquote, birth, and a new name that betrays no caste identification. This stanza alludes to the quote-unquote duties, or four states required in human evolution. Four necessary steps on the ladder of self-realization, each characterized by ennobling duties. If divine intelligence ceased to work through the consciousness of man, all human beings would remain engrossed in matter, confused and forgetful of the duties inherent in the four graded steps: material wisdom, cultivating, sense fighting, and spirit attaining, required for final emancipation. The goal of all men should be to leave behind the painful material state and to reach successively the other three higher states of human consciousness. When wisdom arises in the soul, all human creative impulses retire into spirit. There is no admixture of human nature with divine nature. Verse 25 to 26. Quote, O descendant of Bharata, Arjuna, as the ignorant perform actions with attachment and hope of reward, so the wise should act with dispassionate non-attachment to serve gladly as the guide for the multitudes. Under no circumstances should the wise disturb the understanding of ignorant persons who are attached to actions. Instead, the illumined being, by conscientiously performing activities, should inspire in the ignorant a desire for all dutiful actions. Unquote. Undeveloped men are highly motivated to act by their matter-inclined impulses and longing for name, fame, prosperity, and sensory happiness. The wise, on the other hand, have detached themselves from worldly pleasures. Their incentive is the joy they find in working for God. Incidentally, and yet purposefully, the inspiring example of such men bring others to the path of lasting happiness. They set aright standards for all who are lower on the ladder of self-realization. An illumined being, above all, has the preference of acting or remaining inactive. Since God acts in creation even though it is unnecessary for him to do so, he exhorts his devotee also to act and to increase the desire for earnest action even in those whose work is still guided by innate material instincts. By activity, all beings are helping, mostly indirectly and unknowingly, to work out the divine cosmic plan. Let's see here. If all the people of the world chose to renounce worldly life and to enter jungles to find God, cities would have to be built there too, and industries founded, for people would die of starvation, exposure, and epidemics. Final freedom must be found not in the avoidance of life's problems, but by activity in the world with the sole purpose of working for God. Now, I think this is a really interesting, very cogent point. Final freedom must be found not in the avoidance of life problems, but by activity in the world with the sole purpose of working for God. This is the big point here. And I just want to elucidate a little bit on this on my own. And that's to say that people, in general, run away from their problems all the time in life. Or they get angry at their problems and they then throw their anger and energy towards, blame, in which they put on other things and other people and other situations and all those kinds of things. It's all these trappings that we get stuck into. But the reality is, and I've said this before, when you wake up in the morning and, you start your day, what are the first thoughts in your mind? Are you giving reference or reverence, to that spirit, to yourself? Are you spending any time in meditation just to start the day off with a nice, calm, mental beginning, And then for the rest of the day, like how often is it going across in your mind when you look at somebody or you deal with something or whatever? I mean, it seems to be an impossibility that people can walk around with the idea of spirit constantly being reinforced in their mind's eye, let's just say, but it's not impossible at all. It does take work. It does take an unraveling of your spiritual onion, so to speak, right, to get to that core. But every section that you peel off is peeled off for good. You don't have to repeal those things for the most part. I mean, there are definitely cases where people will advance spiritually and then fall right back into the materialistic kind of, trappings. But the nice thing about that is that when one wants to come back to that spiritual side of things, you're not starting from scratch, right? You've at least learned enough to where, you can, step back and realize that you kind of fell backwards a little bit, but you don't have to, you're not a beginner anymore, and you understand that there are certain levels of things, and you give yourself, you forgive yourself often for mistakes that you make, and that's a big part of it. And because another big thing that humans do a lot is that they really are hard on themselves. They don't know how to forgive themselves. They hold personal grudges against people or on their own because they have this guilt complex about things. And that's something that's really going to screw people up big time. And it's one of those hindrances I see for a lot of spirituality is that people really get locked into these ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of these ideas, especially the guilt complex part, is responsible because of our institutionalized religions that wanted to instill control on people rather than freedom. And so here we go. Every single day, like I have said earlier in this broadcast and other ones, we have a choice to act in a godlike fashion. And you don't have to walk around in like white robes and like blessing people, things like that. It's subtle, right? It's just your thought intention even has a bigger power than you can imagine. Being around somebody and just thinking in that term of all things are part of this spiritual soup we're all living in, that can affect the person's intellectual. You won't have to say ever a word to them about anything. And I've done this in multiple aspects in my life with friends of mine who are struggling big time. And then them just spending X amount of time with me has really helped them in subtle ways sort of be able to, express different things and to sort of ask different questions. And then it's moments like that where I have an intuitive idea that like, okay, now it's a good time to talk to this person about X subject or Y subject. Because I've stopped trying to convince people of anything. One of the nice things about having a channel like this, and being an anonymous to an extent, is the fact that I don't want to connect this to myself. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do everything with you guys. This channel is dedicated to any soul who comes across this and benefits from this one way or the other. And so this is part of my day, is sitting down and reading this book and all these other books and all sharing the information and sharing my own experiences. This is part of me living in this way. And so just so you guys understand, it's subtle. It's not something that has to be like this extraordinary thing and whatever else, because people love to dramatize these kinds of things, which is a big problem with both Old and New Testaments, is that they've taken a lot of really these truths and they've thrown in all this pseudo-historical dramatization in it, which is kind of a distraction because people don't then pay attention to what they're trying to actually say. So, but anyways, enough of that rant. Continuing, the Lord creates on a vast scale by forming universes and in a detailed way in knitting atoms together and in creating a little ant's body as delicately and carefully planned as a human form. But even though God is so mightily and intently active in creation, he never loses an iota of his divine bliss. This constancy is possible solely because of non-attachment, lack of hopes and fears. The wise man, remembering that he is made in the image of God, does not act miserably like the ignorant materialist, but acts in happy detachment. This next subsection is titled, Man Must Learn to Work in the World with a Divine Attitude of Non-Attachment, Nonchalant Interest. Absolutely. Acts of creation are not necessary for the perfection of an already perfect God. Creation, therefore, is a, quote, hobby, unquote, of God. He is blissful with it or without it. All his children must learn to work in the world with that same divine attitude of nonchalant interest. As a boy builds a playhouse and then tears it down just to be busy playing, so man should keep busy in the world, but be indifferent to all material changes, even to the destruction of his work by divine ordinance. This does not mean that a poor man should not try to be prosperous, nor that a restless man should not try to be calm, nor that a sick man should not try to be healthy. But man should look after his body and seek prosperity and mental health without any consequent violent agitation within. Jesus advised his followers to take no heed for their bodies and not to trouble about what they should eat or wear. He knew that they must feed and clothe themselves even as he himself did, but he wanted them to understand that the way to supreme happiness lies in doing necessary material duties without attachment. Only fools take life so seriously that they are constantly hurt. Yeah, that's absolutely true. The wise look upon childhood, youth, old age, life, and death as passing dramas. Hence, everything entertains them. When one becomes momentarily identified with a tragic picture, he feels miserable, but when he realizes that it is only a part of an entertaining variety show, he feels happy. God wants man to behold the changing pictures of personal and worldly life as a sort of variety entertainment. Often at the end of a plotful melodrama, the audience feels, quote, that was a good picture, unquote. The devotee should realize that God and his human children are the audience for ever-changing presentations of his cosmic cinema house, maintained for instruction and entertainment. As a man enjoys himself while he is beholding an engrossing picture and is especially interested if he learns something new, returning home happily when the show is over, so man should cheerfully perform both his simple and his difficult duties while on earth, living it with a smile when the drama of life is over. God happily creates and watches his ever-changing shows in different cosmic cycles, and when complete disillusion comes, rest happily within himself. He expects his sons to behave as he does. The Gita repeatedly warns men against egotistic attachment to the changing scenes of life, since attachment is the root cause of all human suffering. Working because of an attachment becomes a necessity, and yet when necessity is not fulfilled, man experiences misery. Yet the question in the ordinary man's mind is, quote, what is the sense in working without desire or attachment if it must be insipid to work without an incentive, unquote? The answer lies in a consideration of things we do for pleasure, without thought of gain or fame. It is so much more enjoyable when one makes a garden of flowers and takes infinite pains just to satisfy a hobby than when he is compelled to tend that garden in order to eke out a living. Anyone can name many activities that are pursued for their own sakes rather than for gainful results. All duties performed under the compelling whip of material desire and attachment produce misery. But when they are worked out as a sort of hobby without fear of or craving for specific results, the incentives endures, yielding pure pleasure. This subsection is titled, Worldly Man's Life is Full of Worries, Divine Man Makes Life an Enjoyable Game. The material man takes life seriously and makes it full of worries, sorrows, and tragedy. The divine man makes life an enjoyable game. The desire-infested man is full of mental ups and downs and mind-corroding moods, while the desireless yogi is evenly happy, although he is variously active. There is no excuse for any man to live miserably, oblivious of his divine nature. If man could only work as happily as God does in the ever-changing creation, he would understand all of its anomalies, as comparable to the complex variety of a motion picture designated only for entertainment, free from monotony. Performing all actions with God consciousness neutralizes all inner and outer calamities. Therefore, as the materialists work untiringly for sense pleasures which produce constant affliction, so the yogi works hard and unceasingly at meditation which brings ultimate happiness. When the yogi, by working with subtler laws instead of sense attachments, attains oneness with spirit, the Lord then exhorts him to continue to render proper service in the world, free of desire and attachment, to set an exemplary pattern for the inspiration and encouragement of others. So, I think that's going to have to be where I'm going to leave this off. I think it's been about 3 hours. Let me just double check here. Yeah, just about 3 hours. So, unfortunately, let's see here, end screen, yeah. So I very much appreciate you guys joining me yet again today. And for those of you who will catch this later on, thank you so very much for stopping by and listening. Hopefully all of you guys got something, are getting something out of this book. And, you know, of course, I have to plug the man himself. And let me do that real quick. So here we are. The man, the legend, the myth, Paramahamsa Yogananda. The writer of this book, which, by the way, this book is called God Talks with Arjuna. I meant to show this before. My bad. Let's go to someone else besides the horrifying company. There we go. So yeah, you can find this book between like $15 to $30, something like that. Yeah. Oh, this is their own. Okay, cool. So this is the Self-Realization Fellowship bookstore itself. I would definitely suggest, and maybe I'll keep this open so I can put it in the description box. But I mean, if you're going to buy the book, and it's in 2 volumes apparently, obviously because it's 1,300 pages, but if you're going to buy the book, I would suggest buying it from them instead of just some used version or whatever. At the very least, your money will go to the very organization that he set up. That is in essence, is their entire purpose is to basically wake people up and self-realization. So it's a good organization. They actually also have their own YouTube page, I believe. Let me see if I can find that real quick for you guys. And oh look, I'm streaming. Okay, here it is. Oh, it was right there, dummy. Okay, so there it is, the Self-Realization Fellowship. They just had a whole thing this past week. So they have all these videos from the past week here, various meditations and stuff like that. And of course, this may turn you on, turn you off to this kind of thing. They have all kinds of different videos, all kinds of different lectures, all kinds of different stuff. They are, of course, of the Swami order. So all the main nuns and the yogis and the yoginis will all basically wear their monastic robes, which is the orange colored thing. So, take that for what it is. The people themselves, as you can see from this picture, aren't required to wear all the robes because they're just householders or whatever. But when you go into the order, that's part of what they do. So, just so you guys know, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the color scheme thing there. I think that's a problem that a lot of people, especially spiritual leaders, have done over time. They put a little bit too much emphasis on that kind of thing. Famously, what's his name? Osho, who was definitely part of, if you guys ever saw that Netflix documentary about him and the ashram in Oregon, it's pretty interesting. He's an interesting character. He's one of these people, I think, that had a lot of great knowledge, but also had has a couple of other, let's say, thought constructs that he himself never really worked out. And funnily enough, during the course of his time in the ashram, they all wore orange and all these renunciants or whatever else. But eventually, he was like, you know what, we don't need to do this anymore. And I think that just holding on to some of these like physical rules and stuff like that can be a real issue with some people, and that's just the way it is. I think sometimes I think people just have to step back and not be so attached by some of the sort of rules that are meant to get you to a certain point, and then you can kind of put them off to the side once you understand and you kind of let's say transcend those rules themselves. You understand them as just a stepping block to something else. And that's an important thing to remember. Thoth the Atlantean, ever the Joker. If you guys want to check out his joke, just go into the replay of the chat at the end of here at the video. I don't know if I agree with that rule. That's Thoth. So anyways, much love to all you guys. We're almost halfway. We're almost halfway through this thing. But we will be. I'm off all week this week. I will definitely be spending some time working on my homestead and actually taking some actual vacation time, going to some amazing lakes and doing some stuff. Enjoying life in that way. And but I will definitely be back at least a little bit most of the week, every single day, to try to plow through as much of this book as possible, because it's so long. But thanks again for joining me, and we will be back again tomorrow morning. Hopefully I'll be able to do maybe a 4 or 5 hour long stream. We'll see how early I get up and how quickly all things considered get together. But otherwise, if you like the like button, or if you like the video, hit the like button. If you enjoy listening to the book and whatever else, and you could think other people would like it, share it. Do whatever you want to. One way or the other, I have no attachments on that, so it'll grow however way it'll grow. And so hopefully this will definitely intrigue some people. But it is a long book, and it's a lot of information to absorb. So I totally get why some people wouldn't be able to kind of hang on for as long as they can. But I appreciate all of you who do, and hopefully you guys get something out of it. And until the next time, bless all of you guys, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Peace.